After Ainz gave his warnings, his life truly did become peaceful. The Dragon Council obviously told the Platinum and Brightness Dragon Lords of his visit, and neither had tried to spy on them since that day. The slain theocracy was also very quiet. Now, Ainz had plenty of spies to keep an eye on them, and they were scheming as normal, but it was nothing but talk. He'd scared them good enough that half the cardinals tried to shout down any conversation about him, whether good or bad. That had only been the start of his peace, though, and it flew by quicker than he ever could have imagined. He should have done what he did sooner. If he had, he wouldn't have had his vacation interrupted in the first place, at least, he thinks so. Getting to spend every day with his children simply made him smile more and more, and his smile only grew when Taylar and Albedo finally popped. They both gave birth to boys and were only a few hours apart, even if that happened to make his children's name days different days. Taylar had been first, and she gave birth to a beautiful baby boy. He looked like the spitting image of Ainz, but with his mother's coloring. He had her coloring exactly from her blonde hair and emerald eyes to her pure white wings, and Ainz even loved the name she chose, Taylar. He couldn't have been happier. Well, until Albedo pushed out his fourth son only hours later. Don't forget about Pandora's actor. Ainz didn't even know he could get any happier until that moment, but he certainly did. Little Anseal was the spitting image of his mother this time, but with Ainz coloring. The only thing he was missing was the black wings. It wasn't long after that Ainz realized he really needed to be present after his children were born because they grew up incredibly fast. Just like Demon and Mieko, Taylar and Anseal started speaking after 3 months and were having full-blown conversations with Ainz, Taylar, Albedo, and everyone else by dinner time that same day. It wasn't as though he needed the reminder, though. When Taylar and Anseal had been born, Demon and Mieko were nearing 6 months at that point, but looked like they were 3 or 4 years old based on their size and intellect. Honestly, they were about as smart as 20-year-old geniuses, but still had bouts of being a child, so it was easy to forget just how intelligent and young his children were. Ainz is certain he didn't go crazy with how many questions they asked because there were so many to take care of them and answer their endless barrage of questions. Ainz hadn't gotten a break after that, though. Oh no, Albedo had given birth again only a couple of months after Taylar and Albedo, but this time, just one child, a boy. Everything about their second son screamed Ainz. He looked just like Ainz, and the only hint of Albedo in his appearance was his yellow eyes. The rest of him was all Ainz, black wings and all. Ainz was a bit stunned when Taylar informed him she and Albedo were pregnant again, but he took that in stride as well. Well, until Albedo had been told she was pregnant again once more. Ainz nearly passed out when he realized, if they kept this up, he'd have hundreds of children in no time. The only thing that saved him was Taylar and Albedo telling him they wanted to wait to have more after their second. Albedo, though, she gave him the opposite desire from Taylar and Albedo, and Ainz was nearly ready to pass out again. However, he knew he couldn't deny his demon queen anything she desired. When their 1 year as a kingdom had come up, they had a giant celebration in Carne and invited the entirety of their kingdom to come, and their vassals, if they so desired. The celebration was a week long, and Ainz has to say, it went even better than he thought. He'd anticipated some declining, but every vassal they had attended for the entire week. Even the dwarves, whom they only had a trade agreement with, showed up to represent their kingdom and stayed the entire week. He thought drinking with them would be the highlight of them attending, but he was proven wrong when they went to see the Runesmith Development Lab. He'd never seen the dwarves in such awe of their own craftsmanship, but he supposed it was understandable. It wasn't every day you suddenly saw what they believed to be dwarven crafting mythology. Watching the commander-in-chief hold a warhammer with 6 runes carved into it while he was completely speechless was a great highlight, but the look on his face when Ainz told him it was for him was better than drinking them all under the table. Not only had all of Ainz's children attended that celebration, but they'd capped it off with a display of power the likes of which this world had never seen before. While they still kept their godly powers under wraps from anyone not from Nazarick, they knew their display to close the celebration would be seen as a godlike power, but also couldn't be mistaken as anything but magic as well. While Ainz or Albedo could have done it, it was Taylar who'd done the honors of changing one of their citizens' races. Ainz still didn't have a mentee, as it were, so he truly didn't have someone to put forth for the honor. Although, he felt obligated to add Infaria's name to the list since he'd been so helpful since taking over as head alchemist. Ainz was actually surprised by the outcome as he completely expected Ashrin to be the runaway choice for the honor, but it wasn't her they named. While she more than deserved it, they'd already shown her favoritism a few times, so it was to be another who wished for it that they would honor. Henry Mock, formerly Henry Amat, the mayor of Carne. Henry's and Peter's 1 year of being married was only weeks after their celebration, and Ainz found it perfect timing to reward her for all her hard work. She not only flawlessly administered Carne as it grew, but she also put off her personal desires so she could do her job above and beyond what they asked of her. When Henry expressed her desire to become an angel, like Peter, before they had children, it was a no-brainer to select her as the recipient. Taylar did turn her into an angel, but not an Aasimar like Peter. Nope, she turned Henry into a Seraphim Empress. The only limit to Taylar changing someone's race after ascending was that she couldn't make them into gods. All other races were on the table for Taylar, though. She knew Henry wouldn't start adventuring or anything, so the extra strength, power, agility, and intellect would be put to incredible use in Carne. It was just a bonus. She was also able to cast Tier 2 divine spells after the transformation as well. The next set of interesting news didn't come from Henry and Peter saying they were pregnant, though. Nope, it came from Faria, Sarah, and Tina. Not only did they get married not long after the celebration, but it was only a couple of weeks later that Sarah told them she was pregnant. Those three had quite the routine and relationship going if Ainz says so. Not only did both women agree to take turns having children, but they also had taught each other the other's jobs. That way, when Sarah was out on maternity leave, Tina could run the agriculture, and when the day came for Tina to get pregnant, Sarah would have no trouble taking over Tina's role as the lead scout. They'd done all that so Faria wouldn't ever have to leave his position as head alchemist. Ainz did love that it seemed everyone around them they aided seemed to be finding happiness, not just them. After that day, it was pretty quiet until children started being born again. Albedo gave birth to another boy, Azalon, who looked like Ainz but had all his mother's physical characteristics. His face was Ainz, but he had Albedo's horns, her eyes, and her black wings on his hips. Taylar gave birth a couple of weeks later to another boy, Azaru. This time their son was all Ainz except his wings. He had Ainz hair, eyes, and face, but he had pure white wings like Taylar. Just like the first time, Albedo gave birth a few hours after Taylar, but this time, his newest child shared their name day with Azaru. His third daughter, Zarnix, looked like the perfect mix of him and Albedo. She had Albedo's beautiful face, but her gold hair had streaks of black, and she had one of Ainz's eyes and one of Albedo's. He loved her as much as he did Mieko and Oriole from the moment she was placed in his arms. Only a week after that, Sarah gave birth to a boy they named Infaria. Ainz could tell Infaria wasn't thrilled with the name, but he wasn't going to deny Sarah with how big her smile was when she suggested it. Luckily for Ainz, after that, it was quiet on the child front. Well, except for Albedo. His demon queen loved being pregnant and loved being a mother. He honestly has no idea how she is able to dote on all their children so much while still ruling over Irantil and Nazarek. Honestly, Ainz has no trouble admitting she was running their entire kingdom with the exception of the Baharuth Empire. For being reluctant to take over when he'd asked, Albedo was an incredible empress who'd easily gained the trust and love of the people of Baharuth. Even though Albedo was already stretched thin in his eyes, the woman still managed to desire even more children. By the time their first official meeting with a foreign representative had come, nearly 2 years had passed since his warning, and Albedo had given birth to another boy, Arnikaz, and was more than halfway through her next pregnancy. Despite that, Albedo was seated to his left, with Taylar on his right and Albedo to her right when they received their guests that day. Ainz has to admit, while he was annoyed to have to deal with this, it turned out to be better than he hoped. While he hoped he could just live in peace for the rest of his days, once he laid eyes on their visitors, one in particular, he didn't mind the interruption. He could tell Taylar and Albedo didn't either. Even Albedo looked to not care. "Your Majesties, may I present to you Queen Asuku Agnaek of the Dark Elves and her brother, Prince Almar Agnaek." Ainz knew he wasn't the only one who was stunned by the beauty of the Dark Elf Queen. If he didn't know any better, he guessed she was from Yggdrasil. However, that was solely based on the fact the woman was drop-dead gorgeous. He had wholeheartedly believed Draudolin would never be topped in beauty by a woman from this world, but he found himself staring at proof that was certainly not the case. The only reason he could even find the words was that she wasn't quite on Taylar, Albedo, or Albedo's level. She had bright silver hair that looked white with how it shined in the light. She had ruby eyes just like he did, but hers seemed to shine brighter than his did, and then there was her body. Holy fucking shit is all he can say. Seriously, she was built like Taylar, Albedo, and Albedo, and he isn't exaggerating. Everything you would want to be dainty was her neck, her arms, her hands, her feet, her calves, and her waist. To add to her perfection, everything you wanted to be large was her ears. Yep, Ainz got a thing for that. Her breasts, her hips, her ass, and her thighs. She looked like a created avatar from Yggdrasil, but Ainz knew she wasn't. Hashtag, 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 hashtag. Insert emoji Asuku. Hashtag, 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 hashtag. When Ainz finally was able to tear his eyes from the Queen of the Dark Elves, he was glad he was so damn handsome because he was certain if he wasn't, his wives and lovers would be leaving him for Almar, brother of the Queen and Prince of the Dark Elves. Even Ainz could admit the man was damn good looking. It probably helped he didn't have a shirt on, and he was nearly as ripped as Ainz, but the fact he had the same hair and eyes as Asuku didn't hurt him. Nor did the obvious warrior feel the man had about him. Ainz is fairly certain, without using analyze, he's the most powerful warrior Ainz had come across in this new world. The man obviously wasn't afraid to show off his muscles, and that went the same for his weapons. There were 2 scimitars on his waist, one on each hip, and everything about his attire, from the lack of it on his upper body to the loose lower garments, screamed he could hurt you if he desired, and he was ready to do so at a moment's notice. Hashtag, 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 hashtag. Insert emoji Elmer. Hashtag, 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 hashtag. Queen Asuku, Prince Almar, may I present to you Exalted King Ainz Gown, Exalted Queen Taylar Gown, Exalted Queen Albedo Gown, and Empress Albedo Gown. Your Majesties. Ainz didn't expect the bow of the head from Asuku and Almar as they stepped forward, but returned it when they did. We thank you for granting us entry into your beautiful city and seeing us on such short notice. Ainz could tell just from how many times Albedo and Taylar were crossing their legs that they found the view of the Dark Elf Queen as enjoyable as he did. The pleasure is ours, Your Majesty. Ainz addressed the beautiful Dark Elf. We knew we could not make such important figures wait, and we were also eager to meet you as well. We know little of the Dark Elf country and always look forward to learning all we can of our neighbors. Not to mention, my queens wanted to see if you were as beautiful as the guards were claiming. Ainz didn't say that part out loud, of course. However, they could all see now those guards weren't lying. He thought they might be since all the guards on duty today were elves, but he was pleasantly surprised they downplayed the Dark Elf Queen's beauty a bit. We cannot claim the same, Your Majesty. Ainz even loved her voice as she addressed them. It was even better she wasn't solely focused on him, but talking to all 4 of them. I do not believe there is a being alive in the world who has not heard of the Psycho Kingdom, its rulers, or its endless opportunities for those of all races. Ainz couldn't help but smile at the Dark Elf Queen. While it was the polite thing to do anyway, It made him smile just by the way she describes how their kingdom was known throughout the world. That was just how Ainz wanted people to see their kingdom. It is good to know our reputation is spreading, Queen Asuku. Ainz grinned a bit more when he noticed the dark elf queen shiver when her name left his lips. Is that why you have come to our city? To seek opportunity that is not given so freely to those that are not humans. Ainz could tell from the moment he asked they were there for another reason. Asuko just confirmed what he believed when she responded. We are not, Your Majesty. I have come hoping we may speak on a possible alliance between the Psycho Kingdom, Dark Elf Country, and Dark Dwarf Country. There was a question that immediately popped into Ainz's mind when Asuku responded to his question. There are Duergar in the New World? Duergar. The Dark Elf Queen looked just as puzzled as everyone else in the room save for Albedo, Taylar, and Rabido. Yes, I apologize. We know the Dark Dwarves as the Duergar. I suppose that is not the name they go by anymore. Even though she shook her head, the puzzled look on the Dark Elf Queen's face gave away the answer first. You speak for both countries, Your Majesty? I do. For as long as any of us can remember, the Dark Elves have protected the surface for the Dark Dwarves as they protect us from the monster from the abyss, Your Majesty. Truthfully, she did not plan to stop there. However, even she knew Ainz had something he couldn't wait to say the way his face lit up. Asuku was having trouble processing why he got so excited at the part he did, and it didn't help her when he voiced it out loud either. There's an entrance to the abyss in their kingdom? Asuku was at a complete loss by Ainz's reaction. Even her brother, the strongest warrior her people had ever known, didn't enjoy helping fight those monsters when it was required, and she'd never seen him defeated in combat. No one had even come close in the centuries they'd been trying. However, Ainz Olgaun looked positively elated at the idea, as if his greatest wish had been granted as a child. Asuku had already been fighting every fiber of her being not to simply stare at the beautiful man. The way he reacted to such news made her shiver in more than one way. There is. That was all her addled mind could get out of her mouth, trying to control the range of emotions she was dealing with. She was surprised she noticed that even her brother had frozen for a moment at Ainz's apparent happiness. However, it wasn't Ainz that addressed them next. No, while the king smiled in glee, Queen Taylar took it upon herself to offer something up that Asuku found herself very much smiling about. We would be more than happy to discuss terms with you, Your Majesty. However, why not first get to know us and our kingdom? Later today begins our second-year celebration of the founding of our nation. Asuku had already liked the way this was sounding. When the beautiful Queen Albedo stood up with a smile on her face and finished Taylar's thoughts, Asuka really could only answer one way. We would be delighted if you, your brother, and those that came with you would attend as our guests. After you have seen our vision for how we believe a kingdom should be run, we may discuss an alliance between our people. I'd be honored, Your Majesties. As Asuka said, there really was only one way to answer. She'd already been floored by what she saw before she ever stepped foot in this city. The sheer magnitude of this place was daunting, and she wasn't mentioning the flying castle she had a hard time taking her eyes off of. Even if she wasn't. Super pleased with what Ainz said next as he stepped between his queens, she still found her displeasure minimal at best. Taylar and Albedo shall show you to your accommodations for your stay. I wish I could join you, but I have a prior engagement that requires my attention. While I did truly wish to pick Prince Almar's mind on battle, I hope you wouldn't mind a substitute, Prince. I assure you, if you wish for discussions on combat, you will find no more eager a mind. While everything Ainz had said was the truth, it also came with a very large caveat that made him grin. If this went as he hoped, he might just start giving Taylar a run for her money in the matchmaking department. I would welcome the discussion, Your Majesty. Ainz couldn't help but grin wider and excuse himself quickly. He waited until the door shut as he entered the hall to use gate. His grin never left as he opened that same door once more a few moments later. However, he wasn't alone this time. Prince Almar, I'd like you to meet Zeshi Zetsumii. Zeshi, this is Prince Almar. He was quite eager to discuss combat of many forms, but I have a prior engagement. Would you mind keeping the prince company for me and answering any of his questions? Ainz is happy to say, for the first time he can remember, Zeshi had trouble looking back at him once she'd laid eyes on another being. Not at all, my king. Zeshi didn't see it. Very well done, my love. Ainz threw an arm around Taylar's shoulders when she'd made her way over to him. Albedo was starting to show Asikuat as Zeshi and Almar were already passionately discussing strategies. I did learn from the best, right? Even if it was an automatic response, her smile made it more than worth it. However, even when that smile stayed, her next words weren't a shock to him. He'd seen this coming for about 2 weeks when they'd learned of the Dark Elf party heading toward them. You know what she will suggest, correct? I do. Are you going to do as you said, or are we going to have another Lord Aiden situation on our hands, my love? Ainz slipped his hands around her waist before he said that, knowing she couldn't escape now. Even though it looked like a playful slap to his shoulder, he actually did feel it. Gods, I knew you'd bring that up. I just found out I was pregnant, and my hormones were going crazy. All I heard from him that day was someone wanted to take away the father of my unborn child. You have got to let me off the hook for that one of these days. Ainz wrapped both his arms around her and dropped a quick kiss on her lips. He knew she wasn't really mad because the smile never left her face. Perhaps, one day, another playful slap later, and Ainz really did need to know her plans. She said she still wasn't sure. Although, he was convinced it was not because of a certain dark elf queen, but what that meant for a certain dragon queen. So, have you made up your mind yet, my beautiful angel? Taylar tried to glare at him, but failed miserably. Her anger could make her quite scary, but she had no luck ever mustering it up when it came to Ainz. Even if she'd rib him a little bit anyway. You don't have to flatter me to get your way, husband. She held up her hand to stop him from telling her it was simply the truth for the millionth time, nor that this wasn't simply what he wanted. In the end, yes, I'll accept. Are you happy now? Once again, her glare was horrible. I can't remember me ever not being happy since I met you. The bastard warmed her heart with his words, and she just snuggled into him to let him finish. It wasn't like she dreaded what was to come anyway. But yes, I'm a little happier. Are you sure this is still all right? Ainz felt giving her outs until the very end would be best for the future of this. He was glad to see she barely took a second to answer him. Yes, this is fine. I knew, deep down, this was going to happen eventually. I suppose I can take comfort in knowing you're not the only one to get something out of this deal. Ainz couldn't help but chuckle as Taylar giggled into his chest. He supposed that was one way to look at it. He didn't want to, but had to step back to bid her goodbye. He dropped a kiss on her lips and watched her leave first so she could catch up to Albedo and the rest. The moment the door shut behind her, Ainz disappeared and reappeared in Nazarick, specifically the 10th floor Royal Guest Suites. Now, there were many allies of theirs at this celebration. However, there were very few who got the honor of staying in Nazarick for the duration of the celebration. In fact, there were only 2. Ainz supposed 3 since Climb stayed with Renner, but Ainz just saw those 2 as one being. If Renner was around, Climb was there. Ainz isn't sure he's ever seen her without him, ever. It was cute and creepy, but something he didn't mind at all. For this particular guest, it was her 4th time coming to Carne, but her 2nd time staying in her own room inside Nazarick. Truthfully, it was the first time she stayed here with her current room being hers, whenever she stayed. However, it was not Renner's room Ainz found himself standing outside the door of, and after he'd knocked, he was greeted by a most welcome sight, as it was very obvious Draudalin had been getting ready for the start of the festivities. What he found that brought a larger smile to his face was that she had just started. Her hair was up, she had no makeup on, and she was wearing one of their large, fluffy bathrobes. It was rare, in any world, you got to witness a woman with such natural beauty, but here Ainz was, with it only inches from him. As if he wasn't spoiled enough with Taylar, Albedo, Rabido, and the rest around already, he even got the best eye candy in this world. Although, Asuka looked to nearly match her and call him crazy, but he believed Ashrin grew more beautiful by the moment. That didn't mean the sight of Draudolin still didn't keep his eye. Ainz? Good morning, Dee. I'm glad I caught you before you finished getting ready. Her confused expression came through in her tone as well. She said just what he wanted, just as he wanted, so he could flirt with her a bit more. But I haven't even started. It looks like you just need to get dressed. Right, I forgot about the hair. Here, let me help you. Ainz was tempted to leave the wooden stick in her hair that was keeping it up, but he loved the way she looked with it down even more, especially if she was planning on wearing a dress, as she did every moment she spent here when she visited. Draudolin didn't budge as Ainz reached up and pulled the stick from her hair. He was tempted to leave it as it fell, but he couldn't resist running his fingers through her hair like he was a stylist of some sort. Feeling Draudolin shiver in delight made him smile down at her. There we go. You look perfect. Shall I pick out something for you to wear as well? Ainz, what's... She still looked utterly confused at what was going on. What's going on? So, no to helping you dress? Her look of still confusion was adorable. All right, well, I was hoping to help you dress and speak with you about something, not necessarily in that order. Oh, okay. Ainz chuckled as she stepped aside and let him enter her room. He did love that she had already made it hers by putting a number of personal items, but he wasn't here for that. He turned the moment he heard the door shut. Draudolin was both confused and extremely hopeful. She honestly had no idea why Ainz was acting so flirty. She could have sworn he was openly flirting with her, something he hadn't done since they met those first days nearly 2 years ago. She tried to think of what he might want to talk to her about as she shut the door, but the only thought that came to her mind was something about the week's festivities. However, when she turned to talk to him, Ainz was right in her face, and the way he was looking at her was making Draudolin squirm and heat up in places only Ainz could make her. I was having fun flirting with you, but I'm going to get straight to the point. Draudolin was as glad for that as she was for the way he was eyeing her up. Is the reason you haven't even attempted to find a consort because you are still hoping I will be that consort? I dash. She opened her mouth, but the words just wouldn't come out. She wanted to scream yes from the sky so everyone could hear, but she was terrified this was some test of Queen Albedo's, and if she answered wrong, she'd lose the slim chance she had. There is no game here, Dee. Her body certainly loved it that Ainz leaned down and whispered that in her ear. It is a simple question. Do you want me, Draudolin? Please tell me this isn't some cruel trick, Ainz. For the first time since Draudolin answered her door, she had a clear thought she wanted the answer to, more than anything. She doesn't know if she could take this being a joke they play on her. She'd done more pinning for a man over these last 2 years than probably every woman in the world combined. She stared up at Ainz expectantly and thought he'd start laughing and tell her it was a joke when he smiled down at her. Instead, Ainz didn't answer her question with words, but in a way that Draudolin had been dreaming of. He lightly ran his thumb across her cheek, tilted her head up with his fingers, and kissed her exactly how she always dreamed it would be. No, even better. She couldn't help the noises she made as his tongue invaded her mouth and slid against hers. The last thing she remembers before surrendering herself to him completely was his fingers lightly caressing her shoulders toward her arm as he slid her robe off. Drum roll, please. Introducing the one, the only. Nia Baraja could have never guessed she'd be living this kind of life as a squire when she'd signed up to be a paladin. She thought if she got lucky in her unit placement, the farthest she might ever. Travel from the Holy Kingdom would be the slain theocracy, but that certainly didn't turn out to be the case. She wasn't even close to being a paladin. She was still a lowly squire, and that didn't look like it would change anytime soon. However, even as one of the lowest-ranking members of the entire remaining Holy Kingdom Liberation Army, she was now currently traveling through her 4th kingdom. While it wasn't anything special, she traveled all over the Holy Kingdom as she was from there. She had never expected to travel through the Abelian Hills, even if it was just a little over 2 days only, and end up in the Riestei's kingdom. While Grand Paladin Remedios had insisted they stop in the Riestei's capital to ask aid from Queen Renner, Nia and all her companions already knew it was a waste of time. After all, the Riestei's kingdom was nothing more than a vassal of the Psycho Kingdom now. It turned out to be an extra waste of time for more than the obvious decline of aid from Riestei's. They hadn't even been turned down by Queen Renner herself, as the queen was in the Psycho Kingdom's capital of Carne for a celebration. If that hadn't been a waste of their time enough, they wasted the rest of the day when Remedios insisted they track down Blue Rose, or any other high-ranking adventurers, and ask for their aid. The Riestei's Adventurers Guild turned out to be a ghost town. It had taken them a little to learn why, but Nia could tell Remedios didn't like that all of the adventurer teams had either gone to Irantal or Carne. Nia thought Remedios might actually lose her shit when she found out Blue Rose relocated to Carne. Nia knew Remedios was putting a lot of faith behind her being able to persuade Blue Rose to join their cause. If the Adamantite adventurer team accepted a relocation to Carne, however, that was seriously unlikely to happen now. They had only spent the night in the Riestei's capital before they were, once again, on the road. Their next stop was Irantal, and the city was absolutely nothing like Nia heard it was. Instead, it was what she had expected it to be when she learned how it was constructed. A military base. Nia had heard Irantal was one of, if not the most, heavily traded city in all the world. She'd heard of how it was constructed, though, and always thought that it more warranted a military installation than a trade city, except it was in the perfect location for a trade city. Now, though, it didn't look like a trade city. In most of the places she looked, she saw training going on. It was more apparent in the second ring of the city, but it could be seen nearly everywhere. Even after they entered the center of the city, where most of the trade and merchants usually were, there was training, just of a different variety. Instead of military personnel training everywhere, it was lower-ranked adventurers that Nia saw everywhere. There were still merchants of all types, but not nearly the amount she expected to encounter in the city of Irantal. Their trip to the Adventurers Guild turned out to be pointless for Remedios, but Nia had learned a great deal. There were different types of adventurers now, and the entire approach to what it meant to be an adventurer was completely different than what she witnessed in the Holy Kingdom. Adventurers from the guilds that made up the allies and vassals of the Psycho Kingdom also had the option to enlist in the military, which surprised Nia. It was a rule of all adventurers' guilds not to participate in wars or political disputes, but she could see the temptation to enlist in both from what she learned. While the downside was a steep one to pay, more chances to die, the incentives were something Nia had never seen the likes of. The benefits of serving in the military for 4 years were astonishing to her, and that didn't even begin to describe how she felt about the benefits the longer you stayed in before you retired. By Nia's estimation, if you served 10 years then called it quits, you could relax for the rest of your life because you'd be given a retirement, something she never heard of, and it was more than enough gold per month to live very comfortably. When she realized the benefits doubled if you were both an adventurer and soldier, it made perfect sense why so many seemed to have become both. When she learned adventurers were trained now, before being sent out, and of the dungeon they trained in, she nearly resigned from the Holy Kingdom Liberation Army and signed up herself. Hearing recruits that died, which hadn't even happened yet, could be resurrected made her eyebrows raise. When she learned how much it cost, her jaw dropped. It was a 20th of the price the church charged and a higher tier spell. Anyone who went to the temple to get a friend or comrade resurrected would need 2,500 gold, and it would get them the tier 5 divine spell Raise Dead. In Irantal and Carne she learned, it cost you 500 gold for a resurrection, and it was the tier 7 spell resurrection you received, which could raise nearly any dead person. Even a common farmer would more than likely survive. If all of that wasn't enough to question if she lived in the right kingdom, she saw iron-plate adventurers wearing and carrying gear that came close to matching Remedios' national treasure holy sword. It was insane just how much power she was surrounded by, and it was on those of the Psycho Kingdom who were considered nothing but recruits. After their initial sweep, they found an inn to stay the night, and everyone set off to gather information. Well, everyone but Nia, who had to stay behind and polish armor. It wasn't until they returned and ate that Nia was able to go explore the city herself. She wanted to look around, and she really wanted to get away from Remedios. When the woman learned there was no mayor anymore and that an administrator handled most meetings, she already wasn't happy. When she learned if it was urgent enough that Demon Queen Albedo would be the one to take the meeting, Remedios couldn't hold her scowl no matter how many times Vice Captain Gustav told her to keep her feelings to herself about the monarchs of the Psycho Kingdom. Nia knew Remedios only recognized one ruler as the true ruler, and it was her intention to plead to the Angel of Life to save them. Nia thought it was foolish of her to be so closed-minded, but she wasn't in charge. Not only had they witnessed prosperity they'd never seen from every kingdom they'd ventured through, Nia had heard nothing but positive things about Exalted King Ainz Olgown and Demon Queen Albedo Gown. Plus, as much as Remedios didn't want to admit it, the king was an angel as well. Just because the man had black wings and claimed death as his domain didn't make him any less an angel in Nia's eyes. He'd done nothing but positive things as well. A lot of people would point out the tens of thousands he slaughtered on the Katsa Plains as not a good thing, but Nia had heard all those reports. Ainz Olgown hadn't started that war, he just finished it. Plus, Queen Taylar didn't exactly sit and watch from the side. It had been Demon Queen Albedo who watched. Queen Taylar killed plenty of men herself. The more Nia walked around the city of Irantal, the more she was tempted to see if any of these new adventurer teams could use a mediocre archer and scout. Seriously, she had no idea adventurers smiled as much as these ones did, and they were at the bottom of the food chain. Nia learned from a couple of drunk adventurers that they made 4 times what she did in base pay. That didn't even include their bonuses for clearing levels of the training dungeon. She was seriously upset with the career path she decided to go down after only walking around for less than an hour. Nia returned for dinner and then went back out after to avoid Remedios. Vice Captain Gustav seemed to have her rage somewhat contained, but it was only getting worse the more she was in Irantal. Gustav had to bring Remedios inside to calm down after one particular encounter on the streets. Remedios had been unable to accept how well Irantal was being run and how safe it was. She, loud enough for others to hear, proclaimed it had to be because of Queen Taylar, but she was quickly corrected by nearly everyone around her. Don't get Nia wrong. The people of Irantal sang the praises of the goddess of life and creation, as they called Queen Taylar, but none allowed Remedios to shift the congratulation to anyone but the one truly responsible for the safety of Irantal, Demon Queen Albedo, or the goddess of strength and desire, as most referred to her as. Nia thinks Remedios may have been able to keep herself in check and collect intel if it had been humans telling her the error of her ways. However, while all the humans around did correct her, many of those who did were goblins, yuan-ti, elves, and many other races. Nia, on the other hand, thoroughly enjoyed her time in Irantal. Not only was it interesting everywhere she looked, but she also managed to get a very nice and luxurious meal for what she normally paid for slop. She was a bit sad when they left the next morning, but only for a few moments. She'd learned a lot about the city of Carne during her day in Irantal, and she hoped half of what she heard was true. She had a feeling it would be even more splendid than she'd heard, though, and that was only based on the number of people traveling the paved, yes, paved, road from Irantal to Carne. Even traveling from the Riestai's capital to Irantal on paved roads hadn't made her realize how helpful they were for travel until they were headed toward Carne. Luckily for Nia, she was still asked to scout, even if the road was well traveled, and she happily accepted those orders. She'd do anything she was asked if it took her away from the permanent scowl on Remedios' face. While Nia understood Remedios had spent most of her life fighting demi-humans, it wasn't these demi-humans. She didn't see any of the races that called the Abelian Hills their home in Irantal, nor on the road as they traveled to Carne. If that wasn't the reason for her permanent scowl, then Nia didn't understand why she couldn't just give King Ainz and Queen Albedo the credit they deserved. Sure, she'd heard they were powerful monsters who'd wipe you out if they felt the whim, but she hadn't seen nor heard they were anything like that in reality. Nia doesn't understand how Remedios could nearly worship Queen Taylar, as she did the former Holy Queen Kelka, but hate the others. They were all heteromorphic races, King Ainz and Queen Taylar both being angels, but Remedios seemed to hate the king for no rational reason, along with Queen Albedo. Nia only had more reason to hold King Ainz in higher regard only a few hours into their journey. She noticed some tables and shelters set up off the side of the road and people taking a break doing any number of things. When she asked what they were, she learned they were rest stops added between Irantal and Karne. There was also the same headed from Karne to Arwintar, and the ones headed to the Riestai's capital were to be put up after the ones to the Lizardman village were done. After Nia returned to her traveling party and informed them what she learned, Remedios insisted they push on to the third rest area before taking a break. She even increased their pace, and they made it there right before the sun set for the evening. Nia could tell Remedios wanted to push through the night when she learned they were only about 4 hours from Karne. However, Gustav managed to convince her they couldn't arrive in the middle of the night as an official envoy of the Holy Kingdom, so Nia got an extra long night of rest. Well, she still had to polish armor and do her squire duties, but she had nearly 2 extra hours of free time than normal. She even managed to take a stroll through the woods to think about all she learned. She hadn't planned on it, but when she saw kids playing in the forest and inquired if it was safe, she learned even more information. Apparently, all the formidable creatures in the Forest of Tob, the wise king of the forest, the giant of the east, the demon snake of the west, and the evil tree of the north all either pledged their fealty to the Psycho Kingdom or met their end trying to stand against them. She couldn't believe they could even bring the Forest of Tob to heel so easily. It wasn't just that they made allies and dispatched enemies quickly that impressed Nia, it was everything else. She'd heard Arwintar was the shining example of a city with its paved roads and layout, but she couldn't imagine it was more magnificent than what she'd witnessed already. While there hadn't been rest areas from the Riestai's capital to Irantal, they had traveled a paved road the entire way. Every street in Irantal had been paved, and the road toward Karne was even nicer with the rune-carved roads and rest areas large enough for hundreds of people. All that was amazing, but came in a distant second to the people Nia encountered. She was surprised when she learned this wasn't a lot of travelers as most were already in Karne. She mainly spoke with humans, but it didn't matter who she talked to. She'd never met people that were all so happy, let alone this diverse. The number of times she saw a human speaking to a lizardman, or an elf laughing along with a human, or a yuan-ti having a debate with a frogman, was, quite frankly, ridiculous. It looked like none of them realized they weren't supposed to get along. Nia hadn't even realized she was smiling when she walked back to their camp until Remedios told her to wipe it off her face. She quickly did and went inside her tent for the night before Remedios found something else for her to do. Nia found sleep quickly and early that night. She had to wake well before the sun even thought of coming out and had all her duties completed with time to spare before breakfast. She took a quick walk and then made it back for the last leg of her journey to start. Nia had expected to be in the rear for today since they were so close to Karne, but to her surprise, she was still one of the scouts. She was grateful because she wanted to see the city everyone had been talking about on the road here that she talked to. She found it strange no one, and she means no one, would describe to her what the city looked like when they found out she'd never been there before. She also noticed they seemed to keep her within eyeshot as they traveled that morning. It was just over 3 hours after they set off that morning that she realized why they were watching her. Well, she truly didn't realize that until much later, but that is because her mind, thoughts, focus, and perhaps even her soul were stolen when she crested the hill and laid eyes on Karne for the first time. The very first thing Nia laid eyes on would have shocked her to the core alone, but the longer she stared, the more she realized a floating, rotating castle in the sky above the city that looked double the size of the royal palace in Hoburns was just one of many wonders she'd need to get used to. She was a good distance away on a hill, she knew that, but the city was so large it looked very close to her. Irental had looked imposing as it was set up, and it seemed as though the Psycho Kingdom had taken that design to extremes Nia didn't know was possible with the city of Carne. First of all, it had triple the number of rings to it. Where Irental was separated by 3 rings, the city of Carne had 9 rings. The sheer magnitude of the city would have had her jaw dropping, but with the sun hitting the walls at this angle, her jaw dropped because she could tell what each of the city's rings was made of. The first 3 rings shined a beautiful teal color, and there was no person she knew of in this world who wouldn't understand they were mithril. The amount of mithril, though, was something she didn't know was possible. She couldn't even fathom the number of weapons or sets of armor that could be made with that amount of mithril. Inside those rings, Nia noticed that the second and third rings seemed to be farmland. She could see fields as far as the eye could see, and the first ring was a very large training ground that seemed to have a barracks in the middle of every section. It was impossible to count the number of soldiers who occupied the first ring of Carne, and she quickly understood why the other 2 rings were solely for food production. The size of the army alone would probably warrant such a food supply. Nia wasn't even taking into account the population of this city, and it made every city she'd ever been to seem like a village in comparison. It had been hard to look away from 3 mithril walls that were easily miles long, but the next 3 rings were not something she could ignore. It looked like this is where the homes started in Carne, but she could make out buildings that were obviously not homes. However, what had her gawking even harder than she had been were the walls, once again. The dark violet metal was one everyone knew of. Orichalcum had always stood out for its color as mithril did. The fact she saw the entirety of the 4th, 5th, and 6th walls were made of the rare metal was something that was hard to look past. Nia couldn't truly concentrate on the buildings inside those rings because she was simply too stunned at how much orichalcum she was staring at. Other than the fact it looked like the residential area of Carne, from lower class all the way to the upper, the closer you got to the last set of rings. Nia couldn't concentrate on any of the buildings long enough to figure out if there was any purpose to those rings other than homes. And then her heart nearly stopped, as her eyes went wider than ever when she laid eyes on the last 3 rings. The first of them seemed to be the path in which the floating castle moved around the city. However, it was the realization upon seeing the dark blue, almost black, metal that these walls were made of adamantite that had her nearly dropping over dead on the spot. An adamantite plate for an adventurer was only a couple of inches long, and it cost thousands of gold to produce. Nia didn't believe she had the ability to comprehend exactly how much all of that adamantite would be valued in gold. The first ring alone had to be over a mile around, and there were 2 other ones, even if they did get smaller. Nia could barely think, so the many buildings in those rings hardly stood out compared to Nia now knowing what the walls of the city were made of. The only other features she could make out easily were the 3 large statues spread out along the city walls and 2 large buildings that seemed to tower over all the others. She had no idea what the first one was, but it was a very tall, probably around 100 feet high, black building set directly in the center of the city. She had no idea what it was for, but the other, just a tiny bit shorter building was no doubt a temple of some sort. Nia had never seen a black and white temple, nor one of that size, but it was unmistakable simply from laying eyes on it that it was a place of worship. Nia hoped she got a chance to visit it. If nothing else, simply to see a temple so large and grand as it. Squire Baraja, why haven't you reported? Nia's eyes were finally averted from the grand feast for her eyes, and she saw a now familiar sight. Captain Remedios was glaring at her, seemingly trying to kill her with a glare, but Nia was still too stunned to care. All Nia could do was point toward the city while staring at Captain Remedios. "What are you, Dash?" Captain Remedios started yelling again, but the woman's mouth fell open and her words ceased as she turned and laid eyes on the city for the first time. Nia found it fascinating to see the captain be rendered speechless and watched her look on in. What Nia assumed was the same look she had upon seeing the city, complete and utter awe. "Captain, have you? What in the world?" It seemed Vice Captain Gustav was just as floored as he rode up to them. He'd started to talk to Remedios, but was soon staring in just as much awe as the rest of them. Nia would give him credit for trailing off instead of just becoming dumbfounded like the rest of them. "Perhaps we should get into formation now, Captain?" Nia watched as the captain could only nod her head once, but not look away from the city. Even when she rode back to get at the head of the column, she didn't take her eyes off of the city until it had disappeared behind the slight hill she had to descend. She didn't even glare at Nia, she was so lost at the sight of the city. Although Nia was no longer a scout and moved to the back of the formation, she was able to observe more around her than ever before. With the knowledge, she didn't have to be very on guard. She swept her eyes over her immediate surroundings when they'd finally found their place in the entry line. The first thing Nia noticed was there were 2 lines to enter the city. It wasn't a speed-up entry in the way you'd think it did, but in an even more efficient way. They were in the line of people who'd never been to the city before, but in the other line, everyone had a pass of some sort they got from the city of Carne. Nia overheard 2 people in the other line talking about it when one noticed his pass was a different color. It was one of the guards walking up and down the line that explained to them one of them was a merchant pass, while the other was a visitor's pass. Nia also learned there were more than 2 passes. You could get them for any number of reasons, and each one had a unique color, a time before they expired, and security clearance. Hearing that last part meant what type of search you underwent at the gate made sense to Nia. What Nia shook her head at after listening in on their conversation for nearly 10 minutes was that she didn't even realize, or take into account, that the 2 men speaking were a human and a lizard man. It had been such a common sight on the road from Irantal to Carne, she'd already grown used to such a thing. However, when she finally tore herself from their conversation and looked around more, she realized it probably wasn't going to be as easy to get used to as she had already. The first being she saw that wasn't human, lizard man, or elf was a 20-foot-tall frost giant who was wiping down the statue near the gate they were entering. The one of Demon Queen Albedo, she had no doubt. When she thought that couldn't get more interesting, a frost dragon screeched overhead and swooped down into the city. Nia's eyes went wide, and she ducked, like everyone in her party, but she only heard people chuckling around her. When she looked and realized they were laughing at them, she straightened up in her saddle with an embarrassed flush on her cheeks. She felt very cowardly and dumb because she knew a lot of the people in line were farmers and the like, but they hadn't flinched. She should have taken into account these people were used to the sight of dragons flying around, but she was a bit too lost in her embarrassment and her environment to think that deeply about it. By the time they made it to the front of the line, Nia had seen more races of beings than she knew existed in this world. The envoys of the Roble Holy Kingdom, correct? It was hard for Nia to see from the back, but she could tell it was the guard who'd greeted the captain and vice captain like that. Nia wished she could see Remedios' face being addressed in such a way by an elf. She pictured the woman was beet red by now. "That is us, sir. May I ask how you learned of our arrival? We didn't send a runner ahead." Nia was fairly certain her assessment of Captain Remedios had to be correct because it was Vice Captain Gustav she could hear speaking with the guard. "Their Majesties received word when you were in the Riestei's capital you may be headed this way and informed us to keep an eye out for your party. Is this all that will be joining you, good sir?" "It is." Nia nearly giggled at Remedios finally grinding out those 2 words. She really wished she could see her captain having to talk with this elf. It would give her good dreams for weeks to come if she would have been so blessed. Squire Baraja. Nia had been so caught up in thinking of Captain Remedios beet red she missed everything that happened after that. All she heard was the captain yelling at her again, and she turned to see everyone staring at her. It wasn't until then she realized they had all dismounted and she hadn't. She hastily jumped down and secured her mount before turning. It wasn't until she realized they were all still staring that she understood what was going on. If it wasn't for Vice Captain Gustav rolling his eyes toward the gate, she wouldn't have understood what was going on. Instead, she realized, but said nothing about, that she was meant to be the test dummy to enter Carne. Perhaps Nia would have hesitated if she'd heard what the guard had told the rest of them, but she didn't, and she was very excited to enter Carne after talking with people headed there on the way. She nearly shit her pants when she stepped through the small door, and she's pretty sure she peed in her pants a little. The moment she stepped through the door, there was a hulking mass standing just to her left and right she didn't notice before. It had to be nearly 10 feet tall with the largest shield Nia had ever seen and a blade that looked like it would cause you a lot of pain before it killed you. She's surprised her mind supplied the answer to what this creature was. She'd heard of them and heard they were everywhere in the Psycho Kingdom, but she never thought she'd be standing inches away from a death knight and not be dead. "Please take a seat wherever you wish, ma'am." Nia turned to look at the guard smiling at her. He looked very amused by her reaction to the Death Knight, and she hadn't even noticed the other door he was motioning to with the chairs she could see. Nia's cheeks flushed in embarrassment again. She quickly scampered into the room and took the farthest seat she could. She didn't even look at anyone else as they entered the room. It wasn't long until everyone was seated, and it was only a few minutes later another door was opening. Nia couldn't help but stare at their newest occupant. The woman who entered was breathtaking. Not only did the words fit her beauty, but she literally stole the air from Nia. She was so divine to look at. Nia knew she was ill-prepared to see a woman so beautiful just by the fact she couldn't stop gawking at the woman's body. She had long hair that looked like a river of gold cascading in waves down her shoulders and back. When she looked in their direction and smiled as she walked to the podium, Nia couldn't believe the woman's eyes were a beautiful gold color she'd never seen before. Nia could never say this out loud, especially not with Remedios anywhere in hearing distance, but this woman looked more like a holy queen than Holy Queen Kalka ever did. It didn't matter if it was her aura, her beauty, or her incredible womanly appeal. Greetings, representatives of the Roble Holy Kingdom. My name is Henry Mock, and I am the mayor of Carne. I am here to greet you on behalf of their majesties and go over a few guidelines and laws you will need to be aware of if you wish to enter our fair city. We are ready whenever you are, Lady Henry. Nia wishes she could see why Vice Captain Gustav was the one answering the beautiful mayor of Carne, but she could only see the back of Captain Remedios' head. Nia didn't notice Henry having to fight back, rolling her eyes. Henry would never get used to being addressed as a lady, no matter how often it happened now, which was nearly every time someone talked to her. She even got mistakenly called princess every once in a while since her transformation. You shall be allowed to carry your weapons on you whenever you please inside the city of Carne, but do not draw them unless it is to defend yourselves. That may seem like a normal thing to adhere to, but Carne's population is made up of countless races, many of which others are afraid of. However, if they are inside the city, they follow the same laws you must, and they will not harm you. Nia already had an idea this would be a melting pot just based on those she'd seen on the journey here and waiting to enter the city. She was rather excited to see more of the city. Nia then listened as Henry explained all that they might find terrifying when they entered the city, and even Nia was surprised by some of the monsters, beings who occupied the city. Watching Henry laugh off a death knight being strong was a tough pill to swallow for Nia. It was only eclipsed when the beautiful mayor nonchalantly dropped that Soul Eaters, the monsters responsible for the death of an entire Beastman capital of over 100,000 people, pulled wagons through the city and to not be alarmed. Vice Captain Gustav turning white as a ghost is what triggered Nia's memory of what a Soul Eater was. Now that you have somewhat of an understanding of what you shall witness, do you still wish to enter Carne, envoys of the Roble Holy Kingdom? Nia could see Vice Captain Gustav looking toward Captain Remedios. Nia truly did wish she could see the woman's face right now, but she had to settle for her voice. We have come too far to turn back now. We wish to enter the city, Lady Henry. Excellent. Nia is sure Henry's smile could brighten up even the darkest of days. Peter. Nia watched the door Henry came through open again, and an insanely beautiful angelic man stepped through into the room. He was followed by two other angelic men, who were also very good-looking, and an angelic woman who Nia thought was as beautiful as Lady Henry. Then lastly, a girl who looked very plain compared to the rest of them. Nia wasn't sure why she didn't have angel wings like the rest of them, but she did look out of place with the rest of those she was standing nearby. Envoys of the Roble Holy Kingdom, this is Peter Mock. He is the Dash. Lucky man who gets to call this beautiful, amazing woman his wife. Henry started to introduce the newest occupants in the room, but Peter cut her off. Nia could tell he was teasing Henry, but also completely serious. It made perfect sense to her that a man and woman this beautiful would end up together. Henry did slap his shoulder though, but Nia could tell it was simply playful. Please forgive his rudeness, honored envoys. My husband thinks he can act as he wishes just because he's an adamantite-ranked adventurer now. Isn't that right, husband? No, I was just, trying to dash. They all watched him stumble through embarrassed as he tried to defend himself, but his words were cut off when his adventurer team and wife started laughing at him. He gave a terrible glare to his wife, but the one directed at his team did the trick to shut them up. Well, all except the beautiful woman Nia hadn't learned the name of yet. Ninia, please stop laughing at my husband. You're making him feel bad. Nia watched Henry address the beautiful angel, and Ninia did her best to listen to Henry, but Nia could still see she wanted to keep laughing. She simply bit her lip to contain the giggles. I apologize, fearless leader. Ninia was struggling not to burst out laughing. Shall we continue? Or do you need to ask your wife for permission? Ninia couldn't hold her giggles in after that, and neither could the rest of their adventurer team. Henry tried as best she could, but a few musical giggles escaped her lips before she schooled her features. Now, Ninia. Don't go making fun of my husband because he wants to make sure his wife approves of all he does, or should I let everyone know who turns you into a blushing maiden and whose approval you are always seeking out? Nia watched the Ninya's eyes go wide in terror before she shook her head violently. That got a chuckle from the rest of them standing there before Henry turned to address them once more. I apologize for us getting sidetracked. We shall try this again. This is the Swords of Darkness, adamantite-ranked adventure team of Carne. Their leader, Peter Mock, and his companions Dine Woodward, Lucrut Volve, Ninia the Spellcaster, and last but not least, Archie E.B. Rylefurt. They have been sent to escort us to your accommodations and answer any questions you may have that I may be unable to answer. It was Gustav who asked the exact one-word question floating through Nia's head. Accommodations. Nia wondered if Henry always smiled before she answered questions to throw people off with her beauty. She can't remember a time the woman didn't do it before answering questions. Yes, their majesties have allotted rooms to you in the center of the city in the building known as City Hall. While the last occupants were Queen Asuku of the Dark Elves and her traveling companions, we all know it very well as it used to be my residence before Peter and I were married, and the Swords of Darkness spent many a day there with me. Once again, Nia wished she could see Captain Remedios's reaction to Lady Henry's words. She can imagine it wasn't a good facial expression by how Lady Henry continued. If you are not comfortable with these arrangements, you are more than welcome to find a place to stay yourselves, but I doubt there is an open room in this entire city right now. It is the last day of the Founders' Festival and all the rooms have been occupied for a week or more by now. We are honored to accept, Lady Henry. Please pass along our thanks to their majesties for their hospitality during such a busy time for the city of Carne as well. Nia had a feeling Gustav was going to be doing a lot of the talking in Carne. She couldn't see Remedios, but she can imagine the woman was either beet red in anger or looked like she wanted to murder someone. Although, that was pretty much the only two expressions she ever had. Wonderful. If you would please follow me and try not to get lost. Carne is a rather big city, and it tends to overwhelm many the first time they visit. Nia had gotten that impression when she first gazed at the city from the hill in the distance. It was an entirely different experience being inside the city, she realized, when they stepped out into the streets. Nia is glad she got to ride her horse, or she was certain she would have wandered off just getting lost gazing at some of the things around her. There was more than one time she needed to correct her horse's path to continue to follow the escort in front of her. She couldn't help it though. If it wasn't for the fact she was riding past so many races she had been sure a few days ago would attack her on sight and being paid no mind, it was the architecture. Nia had never seen so many different crafting styles, let alone them be done with such skill on this scale. It also struck her how much better these people lived than any other city she'd ever been to. The first set of homes they came to she assumed belonged to some average to above average merchants by the size of the home and the way the few people she saw were dressed. To say she was shocked to find out they were the farmers of Carne was an understatement. The farther they got into the city, the more beings she saw and the more packed it became. She couldn't believe the sheer number of people currently in Carne. She couldn't even hazard a guess at the number, but she wouldn't be surprised if it was over 1 million. The first time she saw a soul eater pulling a cart full of fruit, her horse nearly took off. She had been staring in such disbelief she almost took too long to get her horse under control. She didn't think it would get any more surreal than that, but that was only the start. By the time she made it to the building that was to be theirs for their stay, she was fairly certain she was numb from shock. She'd seen soul eaters, night liches, werewolves, giants, dragons, and even a city dryad, which she didn't know existed. She hadn't even mentioned the number of lizardmen, elves, dwarves, goblins, beastmen, and many other races she never expected to see in a city all getting along. When she dismounted her horse, she realized they were at the large black building she had seen from the hilltop. Just like the rest of the city, the craftsmanship was of an astonishing level she'd never seen before. The entire building looked like it was carved out of one large piece of granite instead of being built. If she is being honest, only the temple, which was right next to this building, looked to be of better construction, and that was saying something in this city. The farmers lived in what she expected to be minor lords' manses, and the lords, or those with favor and or money, in this city lived in manses that looked like palaces. They all were still dwarfed by the floating castle, though. Nia assumed that is where the king and queens lived in Carne. If you would please follow me, I'll show you to your rooms. Nia had to look back to Lady Henry because she couldn't tear her eyes off of the temple they'd just ridden their horses past. They had gone to the back of the building, and they happened to travel on the side shared with the temple. Nia couldn't believe how beautifully crafted the temple was, but she truly had trouble looking away from the doors. She had only seen one side door, but the depiction of angels fighting demons and devils looked so real. It looked like they sealed those beings inside the doors, not that someone crafted them. Nia did manage to follow the rest of the group into the rear of the building, though. Her eyes quickly had many more things she had trouble looking away from, but she still managed to follow her group and not make a fool of herself. It only took a few moments before they were all standing in a stone, circular room. There is another of these on the opposite side, and one more near the front entrance. You may use any you wish, but I suggest the rear entrance. While the front isn't as busy as normal, due to the festival, there will still be residents and visitors to Carne who enter the city hall, so there will be others in the front entrance. Nia could tell Captain Remedios would only be using this rear entrance, and only if she had to leave the building. Captain Remedios, Vice Captain Gustav, and any other 3 you decided upon will be staying on the 5th floor, while the rest will all have rooms on the 4th floor. All you do is push the button on the wall corresponding to the floor you wish to move to. Nia watched Lady Henry push the button labeled 5. Purple arcane runes lit up below all of their feet, but before they could process what just happened, they were gone as quickly as they came. Nia didn't realize they went anywhere until Lady Henry told them to follow her. All she had to do was look in the hall to realize they were not in the same place they had been. Well, they were still in the circular room, but the hallway outside was different. Somehow nicer than the one downstairs, which was hard to fathom. Nia couldn't believe she could be surprised anymore, but the rooms they were shown for the officers were more spectacular than the royal apartments in Hobarns. Nia was envious until they went to the 4th floor, and she was shown her room. It was nearly as nice as her captain's room. Nia nearly couldn't contain her voice when Captain Remedios asked if they could all stay on the same floor. She wanted to ask if she could then take the captain's room, but held her tongue. Probably only because Lady Henry said they could if they wished, and it eased Captain Remedios enough to keep her own room on the 5th floor. What was hard to get over, no matter what floor you were on, was the view. Nia thought the view was even more spectacular than when she first saw the city from the hill. It was breathtaking, and she hoped, more than anything, she could explore the city a little bit. Do you have any last questions for me or the Swords of Darkness? It was Vice Captain Gustav who asked the first question. Although Nia could see Captain Remedios looked like she wanted to ask a question before the Vice Captain. Do you mind if I inquire as to why Queen Asuka no longer resides in these rooms? That was a question Nia hadn't even thought of, but now that Vice Captain Gustav had asked it, she really wanted to know why the Dark Elf Queen would give up rooms this nice. Not at all, Vice Captain. Queen Asuka, her brother Prince Almar, and the rest of their party were moved to different accommodations after reaching an alliance agreement with their majesties just a few days ago. Is there anything else you wish to ask? Nia knew what question would come out of Captain Remedios' mouth before the woman probably even thought it up. Yes, do you know when we can expect to have an audience with Her Majesty? Even Nia wanted to roll her eyes at how predictable and rude Captain Remedios' question was. It was obvious Lady Henry understood every aspect of how Captain Remedios worded it as well. Lady Henry seemed to just smile and ignore it. I do. I was told you may either have your audience after the opening ceremony today, or if you prefer to get settled first, you may have it first thing tomorrow morning. Well, we would like to meet with their majesties as soon as possible, Lady Henry. The captain did start to answer, but the vice captain was quick to cut her off. Everyone knew what was about to come out of Remedios' mouth, and no one wanted to watch the woman just continue to be more disrespectful after the warm welcome they had received. I will inform their majesties of your desires then, Vice Captain. The final day ceremony shall begin in a little over an hour, and after the blessing of the Supreme Ones, I'm sure you will be able to have your audience. Nia could still see Captain Remedios steaming from being cut off, so it was Vice Captain Gustav who asked the question all of them wanted to. Blessing of the Supreme Ones? The way Lady Henry smiled when she answered, along with all the Swords of Darkness, let them know this was something special before she even opened her mouth. Yes, each year on the last day of the Founders' Festival, one of the citizens of the Psycho Kingdom is granted special recognition for their contributions to the Psycho Kingdom. This is our 2nd year of the festival, and it is High Priestess Ashrin who shall be receiving the blessing of the Supreme Ones this year. How is it blessing? Nia really hoped Captain Remedios learned to better check her tone. She's sure Lady Henry and the rest will get fed up with it eventually. If I were to simplify it, it is our Supreme Ones granting one of their subjects their greatest wish, using their own godly powers. That's rather vague. For the first time in more than a year, Nia agreed with Captain Remedios on something. That answer could literally encompass anything you could think of. It didn't get any more vague than that. I suppose so. Well, how about this? For some reason, Henry bowed to them again. None of them understood until she finished a few moments later. Let me reintroduce myself. My name was formerly Henry Amat, a human, frontier villager of Carne when it was still a village. I grew up here my entire life and was here when the slain theocracy rode through on their horses and cut down my fellow villagers, including my parents, from here to Irantal. For some reason, though, Henry was smiling and looking at Peter. However, that tragedy led me to meet not just their majesties, but also the man I love as well. One very big downside to falling in love with an angel, though, is getting old and gray while he stays young and handsome. So, their majesties granted my wish to grow old with my husband. Henry's arms didn't just go out wide as if she was going to hug one of them. Nope, 6 beautiful, white wings also sprouted from her back. It looked like her body and wings were surrounded by a gold aura, and there was a faint gold halo over her head. Now I am Lady Henry Mock, Seraphim Empress and Mayor of Carne. Nia was sure Lady Henry couldn't get any more beautiful, but she was very wrong. It was astonishing to see the woman was somehow more gorgeous. Her wings disappeared, along with the aura, very quickly though. Does that answer your question, Captain? Captain Remedios's jaw was nearly on the floor, and all the swords of darkness and Henry couldn't hold back their chuckles and giggles. Vice Captain Gustav did manage to ask, "Which one of their majesties blessed you, Lady Henry?" "I was honored enough to receive my blessing from Her Majesty, exalted Queen Taylar, but all of their majesties may grant it. Exalted King Ainz shall be the one to grant High Priestess Ashrin her blessing in a little over an hour, Vice Captain." I see. Nia did wonder if Lady Henry ever didn't smile. She imagines it throws off everyone as much as it had all of them as they spoke with her. No one had anything else for them, so they took their leave and Nia finally got to get settled into her incredible room. However, she barely spent any time in it because she was given 2 hours to spend as she liked before needing to come back for the audience. Nia had no idea why she needed to be present for it, but she was looking forward to meeting their majesties. All Nia ended up doing was walking across the street. She wanted to visit the temple, just to see the inside. There was an insanely long line up the steps, but it seemed to be moving at a decent pace, so Nia joined the queue. She was only in line for a minute though before the person behind her asked Nia if the Roble Holy Kingdom was truly here to wish High Priestess Ashrin good tidings. It was then Nia found out the line she was standing in was to speak with the High Priestess, who was going to receive the blessing of the Supreme Ones. She did want to meet the woman, but she wasn't sure she had the time. Instead, she stepped out of line and started up the steps when she was informed she could just walk in and look around if that was all she was there for. It was quite the climb to the entrance, and Nia is surprised she didn't topple down the stairs from how hard she was staring at the amazing construction before her. When she finally made it to what had initially drawn her eye to the temple, it was hard to entire. It wasn't that Nia didn't feel welcome. No, the front doors couldn't even be described as works of art, they were so spectacular. Nia didn't feel like she was looking at a depiction of a battle between heaven and hell. She felt like she was watching it as she gazed at the doors. She knew the only reason she managed to walk farther inside is that they weren't closed. She isn't sure she'd ever look away from that door if she saw it closed and the beings on it truly looking like they were in battle. She didn't wander very far into the room, at least she thought before she heard someone call out to her. "Oh, a new face. May I be of assistance in any way, Miss Paladin?" Nia had been so awestruck by the details of the temple, she didn't realize she'd wandered straight through the middle of the room. When she finally took her eyes off the intricate details of the walls and ceiling, she came eye to eye with a beautiful, blue-haired elf. While Nia wasn't exactly positive about whom this was, there were a few details that gave away who she thought she would be. First, her robes were nearly as beautiful as the craftsmanship of the temple. Second, she had an air about her that Nia had only encountered one other time in her life when she met High Priestess Collard. And even then, this elven woman felt more like a high priestess than the one time she'd met High Priestess Collard. And lastly, the enormous line queued up behind her kind of gave away who she was. However, even if Nia had 1,000 questions she wanted to ask the High Priestess, a very stupid observation, in her estimation, is what left her mouth in the form of a question. "You're a woman and an elf?" I think so." Nia turned a bit red when the beautiful elf traced the curves of her body. Nia almost passed out from embarrassment when the beautiful elf finished at her pointy ears and winked at Nia. Yep, still a woman and an elf. Nia felt like dying as she noticed everyone staring at her. "Do you have any other questions, Miss Paladin?" "I'm not a paladin." Oh. Nia was completely thrown off by the way this beautiful elf smiled at her. "I thought all our visitors from the Roble Holy Kingdom were paladins? Everyone else is High Priestess. I'm just a squire." Nia has no idea why the beautiful High Priestess smiled a bit brighter at her words. Even when she spoke again, it didn't give away why she was smiling so beautifully at her. Well, it is very nice to meet you, Miss Squire. I'm High Priestess of Life and Death, Ashrin Kelsey's. I'm Nia. Squire Nia Baraja, High Priestess. Nia found her mouth moving on its own to introduce herself to the beautiful elf. When the beautiful woman giggled at her, she realized it wasn't because of her name, but what she kept calling the beautiful woman. It is nice to meet you, Nia Baraja. Please call me Ashrin. Are you enjoying our temple? It's the most beautiful building I've ever seen, Lady Ashrin. Nia can't remember ever speaking something so true before. She did wonder why Lady Ashrin giggled at her, but she found out quickly why. No need for the lady part, Nia. You may just call me Ashrin. Although, it says a lot about your character that you remain so respectful. Nia slightly blushed at that. I'm glad you're enjoying yourself. Please, look around as much as you like. The temple will not be needed until their majesties come for the official start of the final day of the Founders' Festival. If you have any questions and I'm not available, my acolyte, Adria, can answer any question you may have. Nia looked to her left when Lady Ashrin motioned with her hand. She was a little shocked at what she saw. Not only was there another elf standing just a few feet from Nia smiling at her, but the woman was also just as beautiful as the High Priestess. Nia hadn't seen many elves with black hair, but this woman had jet black hair that looked as dark as half the temple. Her eyes were nearly as dark, but Nia noticed they were a very deep shade of indigo, not black. She wore a beautiful gold tiara around her head with a veil that didn't cover the front of her face, but went down the back of her to just past her knees. She had the same graceful and beautiful frame most elves possessed, and it was highlighted by the amazing dress, robes, combination of both she was wearing. The right side of her dress was white and very elegant. The material looked soft, and it didn't just cover her breast and body all the way down to her mid-thigh, it also had a long white sleeve down to her wrist that got wider at the end. The other side of her dress was black and overlapped a bit with the white fabric. There was only a gold medal covering her left breast, showing a bit of cleavage and no sleeve, only a beautiful gold band around her upper arm. The dress went down and stopped just above the front of her mid-thigh, as the white part did, and then curled around the back and back toward the front at the bottom. Hashtag, 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 hashtag. Insert time Adria. Hashtag, 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 hashtag. When Nia truly took in Adria's appearance and the way the fabric was shaped, she realized it looked like a black and white wing wrapping around her body detailed with gold metal. It certainly didn't hurt it hugged every inch of Adria and showed off her legs perfectly either. Do you have any questions for me, Lady Nia? Nia was even captivated by Lady Adria's voice. It was very melodic yet commanding, almost as if a song was booming throughout the room. And no, Lady Adria. Nia didn't have the mental fortitude not to stutter with how much beauty she was surrounded by right now. There was no way she'd have the brain power to be able to think of a question at this moment, let alone correct Lady Adria that she was no lady. If you need anything, just wave me over, Lady Nia. Thanks, Lady Adria. Nia went to turn and thank High Priestess Ashrin as well, but the woman had already moved back over to the line of people and began speaking to them. Lady Ashrin did give her a smile as Nia went to explore more of the temple, though. After those two interactions, Nia was surprised at how hard it was for her to concentrate on the marvelous construction of the temple. It wasn't that they unnerved her, but she couldn't help but realize no one had been looking at her strangely. Nia had been dealing with stares of all types her entire life. Most people would only look at her when she wasn't looking at them, but that hadn't been the case here. It wasn't until then she realized it had been happening since she stepped foot in the Psycho Kingdom's territory. No one looked strangely at her eyes, let alone commented on them. As she walked around trying to concentrate on the architecture, she thought she'd finally found a familiar stare until she talked to them. It had been a mother and her young daughter, but when Nia asked them if she could help them, in her most kind voice, which still usually scared people, they asked very politely where she was from. It was then Nia realized the only people who stared at her were the ones who didn't know where she was from. The symbol on her squire's outfit was what they didn't recognize. After she quickly explained it was the symbol of the Roble Holy Kingdom, every person this happened with thanked her with a smile and then went about their day. "Excuse me, Lady Nia?" Nia didn't need to turn around to know who was addressing her. She is sure she'd never forget the musical, commanding voice of Lady Adria. Nia had only heard one more musical and commanding, and that belonged to High Priestess Ashrin. High Priestess Ashrin was barely more than whispering to Nia when they talked, but it was as if she was giving a sermon to Nia all the same. It was a rather unique quality Nia had never witnessed before. Both of their presences made her captain's and vice captain's presence seem dull in comparison. "Why yes, Lady Adria?" Nia wanted to curse under her breath. She still couldn't talk to this woman normally. There was just something about her that made Nia nervous, embarrassed, and self-conscious. "Please call me Adria, Lady Nia. I'm sorry to interrupt you, as we usually like it when newcomers look around for as long as they like, but I'm afraid you came on a terrible day for a tour." Adria giggled and Nia couldn't believe how angelic it sounded. The ceremony is about to start in 10 minutes, and everyone must take their places to await the arrival of their majesties. Thank you, Adria. Please call me Nia, as well." Nia flushed in embarrassment when Adria smiled at her and wanted to roll her eyes at herself. "I'll get out of the way then. Thank you for all your help today, Adria, and please, thank High Priestess Atrin for me when you get a moment." Nia was rather proud of herself for starting to get it together. She nearly fell apart in the middle there when she realized Adria was staring at her with a smile on her face, ignoring her murderous eyes, as everyone else had been. However, before she could turn and leave. "If you'd like, you may stay for the ceremony, Nia." Nia was rather shocked at Adria's statement. That wasn't at all what she expected the woman to say, but Nia did look around before answering, and it made her answer rather obvious. "I thank you for the offer, Adria, but I think it's full already." It was the first time Nia noticed exactly how many people were in this temple. She couldn't count them all, but there had to be 1,000 people, or more, all sitting and waiting for the ceremony to start. Nia didn't see an empty seat in the building. "Well, I saved you a seat." Nia must be hallucinating because it looked like Adria looked. Embarrassed for a moment before she collected herself. "You do not have to accept. I know you worship different gods. I just thought, well, you seemed curious, so I dash." "I'd love to, Adria." Nia's jaw dropped when she realized she cut off the beautiful elf. "I'm so sorry, Adria. I didn't mean to dash." "It's all right, Nia." Nia had gathered herself rather well until that moment. Adria put her hand on her shoulder to assure her, and Nia started turning red at the intimate contact. "I'd be delighted if you'd join me." Nia was surprised at how disappointed she was when Adria took her hand off Nia's shoulder and motioned down the row of pews. She certainly didn't have time to unpack why exactly that was because it seemed like everyone in the building stared at them as they made their way toward the front. The only reason Nia didn't freak out by the stares, or the fact she was seated in the second row, second seat, right between Adria and Lady Ninia from the Swords of Darkness, was that everyone smiled at her when she made eye contact with them. It was starting to be stranger to Nia. More people looked at her like a normal person than being in a city filled with what seemed like hundreds of various races. She tried to look around as best as possible while sitting in the front, but it was to distract herself more than anything else. She was rather close to Adria and Lady Ninia, as the temple was packed, but every time Adria's leg would brush up against Nia's, Nia got a flush on her cheeks she couldn't stop. She didn't have the time to unpack why that happened when it didn't happen when Lady Ninia accidentally did the same thing. Instead, Nia looked around in areas she hadn't been able to get to or couldn't concentrate on near the end. While the rest of the temple's architecture astounded her, she had trouble tearing her eyes away from the altar once she'd seen it. At first, she thought it was made of the same white and black stone the temple was, but after she'd stared at it for a few seconds, she could tell it was made of metal, not stone. She'd never seen metal that black or that white before, and she had absolutely no idea what metals they could possibly be. Abyssal or and celestial uranium. Nia didn't just flinch when those words were whispered in her ear by Adria because she startled Nia. She also flinched because feeling Adria's hot breath on her neck sent a shiver down her spine that she truly didn't have time to think about. What? Nia had no idea what Adria meant by that. She'd never heard of whatever Adria just told her, but the beautiful, black-haired elf explained it so Nia didn't look as stupid as she felt. The altar, you were wondering what it is made of, correct? Nia could only nod her head and wonder why Adria was so close to her right now. It is made of abyssal or and celestial uranium. I had the same look of wonder on my face the first time I saw it. Oh, I see. Nia was glad Adria had answered the question she was wondering about, but now she had two new questions. What in the hell were abyssal or and celestial uranium? Luckily, it seemed Adria could read her mind or something. The beautiful elf giggled before getting even closer to Nia's ear. Abyssal ore is from the depths of the abyss, the realm of chaos where demons spawn from. His Majesty's armor is made of the same material, and the celestial uranium is from the seventh realm of the heavens. High Priestess Ashrin's staff and some of the accessories the Queens and Empress wear are made of the same metal as well. Adria giggled when Nia's jaw dropped after that explanation. However, she was saved from making a fool of herself again when High Priestess Ashrin entered the room and took her place at the altar. Thank you, everyone, for gathering here on this day to officially begin the final day of the Founders' Festival. As I look out into the crowd, I am heartened to see so many returning faces and new faces here for the very first time. Nia couldn't help but listen to every word that came out of High Priestess Ashrin's mouth. She'd never seen anyone with such public speaking skills in her entire life. It felt more like a queen was holding court instead of an opening sermon, which it certainly was. If she hadn't already realized it before High Priestess Ashrin started speaking, when she led them all in prayer, and the entire temple spoke the words with the High Priestess as one, it would have been obvious then. Nia was astonished that everyone in the temple was saying every word in unison without looking at anything. Even the most devout followers of the four great gods usually needed their prayer book to follow along with the services in the Roble Holy Kingdom. It looked to Nia, though, that everyone here had each memorized into their hearts with the way they spoke the words with such conviction. Nothing proved their devotion than when the prayer finally ended and she heard, Seshi. Seshi. High Priestess Ashrin had ended the prayer with that word, spoken quietly but somehow loud enough for all to hear, only for them to answer with the same word, in unison, loud enough that Nia thought those who called Irantal might have heard them. However, before Nia could begin to fathom what exactly that word she'd never heard meant. I thank you all, again, for your presence and prayers, and wish to thank each of you who spoke to me before this day once more as well. Nia was astounded to watch the High Priestess slightly bow her head to the crowd as they clapped for her. She looked out at them again after standing with a beaming smile on her face. Without further ado, let the ceremony begin and welcome the rulers of the Psycho Kingdom, Exalted King Ainz Gown, Exalted Queen Taylar Gown, Exalted Queen Albedo Gown, and Empress Rabido Gown. Nia turned her head toward the entrance and waited. She expected to see the rulers she'd been dying to lay eyes on walk through the doors, however. We could not be happier than seeing so many of our citizens and vassals turn out for this year's celebration in honor of our kingdom. Nia's head spun back toward the altar so quickly, she was surprised she didn't hurt herself. The last thing she expected to see was the rulers of the Psycho Kingdom, along with a lot of others, standing behind the altar. She could pick out the king, queens, and empress instantly with no help, but she had no idea who the others were. While some of them looked to be very strong, possibly advisors or guards of their majesties, there were plenty of beings standing behind the podium Nia didn't think could be either of those things. The most obvious reason being none of them looked very old to her. Honestly, the oldest of them looked to be around 10 years old or so, but Nia couldn't be certain of their age. While they looked like children, they also had wings, horns, and other features that marked them as non-human. Nia gasped in surprise when she thought she figured out who they were. She watched Queen Albedo, an obviously pregnant Queen Albedo, wrap her arms around the shoulders of a little girl, the oldest girl she saw, and kiss her lovingly on the head, which made the girl squirm. Nia knew that reaction. She'd had it plenty of times. That always happened when a daughter thought she was too old to receive her mother's affection in public. She couldn't believe the rulers of this kingdom had so many children. Although, she counted what looked like 8 children, and she shouldn't have been that surprised. While she knew for certain the girl Queen Albedo kissed was definitely her daughter, as they looked very similar, seeing Queen Taylar and Empress Rabido both holding small children let her know 3 for certain. 8 children shouldn't surprise her for a king who had 3 wives. There was also the problem that their children were incredibly adorable. She could see the king in each and every one of them, but in just about all of them you could tell who their mother was as well. The only child Nia had trouble knowing which mother he belonged to was one of the older boys. He looked like King Ainz to a T. Seriously, he looked like the beautiful copy of His Majesty, but he had blonde hair and green eyes. Unfortunately for Nia, he also happened to be standing between Queen Taylar and Empress Rabido, whom both had blonde hair and green eyes, and she had no idea which one of them was his mother. He seemed to lean into both and treat them both the same as well, so that was no help in her determining who his mother was. While it was hard to tear her eyes away from the adorable children of their majesties, when exalted King Ainz Olgaun started speaking again, her attention was drawn to him. Not only was the man more beautiful than she thought anyone had a right to be, but his voice also boomed over the temple and demanded respect and attention without him having to say it. As you all know, we are not prone to long ceremonies, nor do we wish to waste your time listening to us drone on. Instead, let us get right to the heart of the reason for our gathering on this wonderful day. High Priestess Ashrin, please, present yourself before the congregation. Nia watched the beautiful High Priestess walk toward the altar from her place standing on the side while His Majesty spoke. She stopped in front of the podium, not behind it, with a smile on her face as she turned to face everyone in attendance. I'm sure it will come as no surprise to any of you who know her that when we informed High Priestess Ashrin she would be the one to receive the blessing this year, she didn't want anything for herself. She wished to help all of you, instead of wishing for something herself. Nia wasn't surprised by that. She'd barely talked to the woman, and that was certainly the impression she'd gotten from her. She was a bit surprised by some of the sobs she could hear coming from those seated behind her, though. While we will certainly honor her desires in helping out the citizen of the Psycho Kingdom, all of you know there is no one more deserving of something selfish than High Priestess Ashrin. That statement made High Priestess Ashrin smile at first, but it turned to confusion at the end. The beautiful elf couldn't help but turn and look at exalted King Ainz. Your Majesty? Nia didn't think she'd seen a more handsome sight in all her life than when His Majesty came around the podium to stand next to High Priestess Ashrin and smiled down at her. We know you did not desire to change your race because of what you mean to the elves of our kingdom, Ashrin. However, even our High Priestess still has much to learn about the power of the ones she calls her monarchs. Nia flinched in surprise, and only her, when large magical runes appeared around exalted King Ainz and High Priestess Ashrin and started spinning faster and faster. She managed to look around, and everyone else just looked on in awe, which Nia was also doing very quickly. As much as you don't like to admit it, you're a symbol that all elves aspire toward, Ashrin. As such, since you will never ask anything for yourself, we shall make you the type of elf you deserve to be. Nia watched as exalted King Ainz ran his thumb down High Priestess Ashrin's cheek and smiled at her. If she didn't know better, she'd think they were lovers by the way exalted King Ainz was looking at her. Super tier magic, origin of species. However, when exalted King Ainz opened his mouth, the single word he spoke as the runes shattered caused High Priestess Ashrin's eyes to go wide and her jaw to drop open while the elves in the temple all gasped in astonishment. Lushi. Nia watched in fascination as High Priestess Ashrin's ears started to grow, not just longer, but start to look more like human ears. They still got longer, but they eventually ended up going nearly straight up and down, instead of out to the side, as all the elves she saw had their ears. However, it wasn't just her ears that changed. Her beautiful light blue hair also grew darker by the second and longer as well. By the time it had stopped changing, it was down to her butt and a dark blue color. It was only the very end of her hair that remained the same light blue it had been before. Her face also became a bit longer, she supposed. It narrowed from what it had been, and her features grew, somehow, even more elegant than they had been. While all these changes were easily noticeable by everyone, it was her body changing that had Nia gawking as hard as she had at any other of the changes. The High Priestess had already been very beautiful, but she was only eclipsed in beauty by those standing behind the podium Nia saw when her transformation was over. While she didn't have as large of assets as the queens and empress, hers were very noticeable and fit her figure to perfection. She'd never seen an elf with such a perfect hourglass figure in her life. Nia thought High Priestess Ashrin looked like the goddess of the elves when she turned toward the crowd with a smile on her beautiful face. Hashtag, 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 insert Ashrin. Hashtag, 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 hashtag. Introducing to you all, High Priestess Ashrin Kelsey's, the Divine Elf. Even Nia jumped out of her seat and started clapping when exalted King Ainz reintroduced the High Priestess to the people. She was amazed to see not just a single tear sliding down the High Priestess's beautiful cheek, but most of the elves in the temple were crying as well. When she turned to look at Adria, she noticed the woman clapping and yelling at the High Priestess while tears streamed down her face. There was obviously a significance to being a Lushi, but Nia had no idea what it was, as she'd never even heard of that race. Nia assumed all elves were just that, elves. She thought the only difference was between regular elves and dark elves. She had no clue there were more than 2 races of elves, let alone that the regular elves, as she called them, were comprised of over 40 different races of elves. I thank you, all of you, for your kind words, blessings, and cheers. For the first time in a long time, I find myself unable to find the words to express what this means to me. Nia noticed some of the elves get choked up as Ashrin did. However, she composed herself quicker than the others when exalted King Ainz put his hand on her shoulder and smiled down at her. They all know how much you deserve this, Ashrin. There is no need for words. Their reaction should tell you all you need to know. Nia thought that exalted King Ainz's words were simple, yet exactly what needed to be said. All the High Priestess had to do was look at all the tearful and joyful elves in the temple to see they were even happier than she was to receive the blessing she did. She ended up smiling and also giving simple, yet perfect, words. Thank you, all of you. I'm happy for you, Adria. Nia had no idea why those words escaped her lips as she turned to the beautiful elf, but they did. Nia decided not to think too much about how her stomach felt like it had butterflies in it when the woman smiled at her. Thank you, Nia. I never thought I'd see the day there was a Lushi amongst us. We all thought they were just fairy tales told to us as children. Nia had felt she'd already made a complete fool of herself, so she didn't hesitate to ask what she wanted of Adria. What's a Lushi? Somehow, not only did Adria not laugh at her, but her smile grew even more before she answered Nia. Lushi are divine elves. They were the first elves created by the gods, or so our elders have always told us. We thought they were just stories, but my teacher is now one. Praise the Supreme Ones for granting us elves such a blessing. Nia wasn't surprised by the devotion and reverence Adria spoke her words with. However, she was surprised when the beautiful elf finished and hugged her. She let out an embarrassing eep when she felt her body pressed against the beautiful elf's. Oh, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done that. It's all right, Adria. Adria looked as embarrassed as Nia felt, so Nia imagined she looked twice as embarrassed at the moment. Nia was saved from the embarrassing silence when High Priestess Ashrin went to walk down the aisle and stopped to receive a hug from Adria. "No one deserves it more than you, Ashrin." Nia heard the words Adria whispered to High Priestess Ashrin, and they brought more tears to the beautiful High Priestess's eyes. She quickly wiped them away, though, and continued her way down the aisle, stopping to receive words of praise and hugs from nearly everyone in attendance. It wasn't until she turned back toward the altar that she realized the king, queens, empress, and their children were all gone already. Nia was completely stumped as to how to take their majesties. While she certainly knew they were the most beautiful beings she'd ever laid eyes on, it surprised her how much they didn't seem to want to receive any praise or acknowledgement from their worshippers. It was not at all what she expected when meeting gods. Yes, she just said gods, for that was the only title Nia could think of that fit them. While they might be kings and queens, she knew only a god could have the power to do what exalted King Ainz just did. Plus, she already learned all the monarchs of the Psycho Kingdom could do the same thing. It was a real head-scratcher for Nia. She waited around for the High Priestess to exit the temple and make her way into the streets before she realized she needed to go. However, right as she was about to say goodbye to those around her, Adria smiled at her and spoke. "Would you like to go get something to eat with me, Nia?" Truthfully, Nia would have loved to accept Adria's invitation. However, "I wish I could, Adria, but I'm required at the audience with their majesties, and I need to go prepare as it is supposed to be after the ceremony." Nia wished she could have accepted. If nothing else, just so the smile on Adria's face didn't fall. She did wonder why she had such a reaction to Nia's words, but she was smiling at Nia after only letting her smile slip for a moment. "That's okay, Nia. If you want to share a meal and have some free time, come by the temple. I'm not only here almost all day, but this is my home as well." Nia was a little startled she was hugged again by the beautiful elf, but she didn't eep in embarrassment and managed to return the hug briefly before they broke apart. Nia found herself staring at Adria's smile as she left the building and couldn't quite get the elf out of her head as she made her way back to her room. The moment she stepped into the hallway to head to her room, she got an earful from Captain Remedios. Nia had no idea what she'd done wrong until she realized the captain was pissed she was seen at the temple during the ceremony. Nia had no idea there were magic windows that appeared all over the city so those who didn't get a seat could watch the ceremony. Apparently, Nia had been in view nearly the entire time, with how close she sat, and Captain Remedios didn't like that someone from the Holy Kingdom was seen watching, let alone watching in awe with the rest. Nia badly wanted to yell back and ask how the captain could still think so badly of exalted King Ainz if she witnessed what had just happened in that temple, but she knew she couldn't do that. Instead, she stood there taking the verbal lashing for nearly 5 minutes. Luckily for Nia, she was saved by Vice Captain Gustav reminding Captain Remedios their audience with their majesties was in only a few minutes. That gave Nia time to head to her room and grab the few things she needed before she was heading back downstairs to meet the rest of their party. Nia wanted to roll her eyes when she met everyone around back right before they walked around to the front of the building. The captain reminded them to walk with their heads up and chests out in pride to show they represented the Holy Kingdom, and that is what Nia wanted to roll her eyes at. Nia had only been in this city for a few hours, and she already knew the farmers of the Psycho Kingdom had more reason to be proud of themselves than every citizen of the Holy Kingdom, let alone a group of ragtag paladins and squires who made up their patchwork army. Nia wasn't surprised by their welcome into the entrance hall, but even she could tell Captain Remedios was. The woman stopped in her tracks for a moment when the doors opened and music started playing. Nia had noticed the flags and expected it, but truthfully, she expected it after seeing their majesties just for the brief time she had. Seeing the flags of the Roble Holy Kingdom on the flagpoles to her left and Psycho Kingdoms to the right let her know they were being welcomed as official ambassadors. "I am honored to greet you again, honored envoys of the Holy Kingdom." It was Lady Henry who stood inside the doors to greet them. It seemed the woman's job wasn't done, even on a day as important as this to her people. If you would please follow me, I will lead you to the throne room. Nia was inclined to follow immediately, but it was, surprisingly, Captain Remedios who asked a question Nia hadn't even thought of. After she asked it, though, Nia wondered why she hadn't thought to ask the same thing. What about our weapons, Lady Henry? Nia isn't quite sure why Lady Henry smiled in amusement, but she was seriously starting to question if the woman did anything but smile. You may keep them on you, of course. Nia is sure even her face asked the question Lady Henry answered, without them actually asking one. Many people who experience carne for the first time feel tense and on edge. Allowing you to keep your weapons should make some of those feelings subside. Plus, we trust our honored envoys from the Roble Holy Kingdom to represent themselves with class and dignity befitting their status. Nia was a bit surprised. Not only by Lady Henry's reasoning, which was actually very understandable, but also by what came out of Captain Remedios's mouth next. We thank their majesties for their show of faith in us. May I ask that you hold on to everyone's weapons, aside from myself? I apologize, but I carry a national treasure of my country and cannot allow it to leave my hands. I hope you understand. If that is your wish, we shall have no problem with your request, Grand Paladin Remedios. When Nia watched Lady Henry motion to the side, she could tell she was the only one who wasn't a little freaked out handing their weapons over to a Knight Lich. Nia wondered how she'd become so numb in such a short time that a Knight Lich didn't make her shit her pants. If you'd kindly follow me. When they entered the throne room, Nia was, honestly, a bit underwhelmed. Don't get her wrong, it was nicer than any she'd seen before. However, she expected grandeur on a different level, but it seemed to only be as nice as the rest of the building. She wasn't surprised by the 4 thrones in the room, but she was surprised by the flag hanging behind them. While the flag of the Psycho Kingdom was hanging there as well, it was on the left side of the very large one in the center. It was made of a material Nia had never seen before, with a symbol that didn't match that of the Psycho Kingdom, and it was much larger than any other flag in the room. She was about to wonder why that was when Lady Henry spoke once more. Announcing the arrival of His Majesty, exalted King Ainz Gown. Nia was just as surprised by the very short, no titles introduction, as she was by what came out of Captain Remedios's mouth again. She had to start wondering if the woman was changing her mind about the Psycho Kingdom, specifically its king. Bow your heads. Nia suspected she was the first to bow her head, and it was only seconds later she heard a door open and quiet steps enter, followed by a loud clink that accompanied every second step. Please raise your heads. Nia wanted to raise her head immediately, but she knew as an ambassador, she had to time it correctly. She waited the silent second she needed to before finally raising her head. When she expected to be solely focused on His Majesty and seeing his beautiful visage once more, her attention, along with everyone else's, was drawn elsewhere immediately. Nia is positive she is the only one who didn't reach for a weapon. However, they had all given up their weapons, except Captain Remedios, who drew her weapon and yelled what they all wanted. Jaldabaoth. Nia could see it plain as day. Standing to the right of His Majesty and opposite Lady Henry was none other than the devil who'd been destroying their country. However, before Captain Remedios could move to attack, a black shadow clad in a dark aura appeared right in front of her with a knife to her throat, holding her holy sword. They could all see her struggling to free it, but it not budging an inch. Deathard 4, stand down. As you command, Dark One. The guttural, spine-shivering nature of the creature's voice made Nia nearly wet herself. It didn't help it simply disappeared into the floor after answering its master. I believe we have a misunderstanding here, Grand Paladin. Although, it does give me insight into your foe's powers and origins. Nia was in disbelief at the situation, but she is sure Captain Remedios was only making it worse. There is no misunderstanding. I knew you were in league with that fiend. He's standing right beside you. Do you take us for fools? I'll cut him down right this instant. Captain Remedios went to lunge, and Nia watched as His Majesty appeared directly in front of her and grabbed her weapon by the blade. She watched the captain struggle while His Majesty spoke to her. They say you only have one chance to make a first impression, and you are blowing yours, Grand Paladin. I suggest you sheath your weapon and allow me to explain, or the only monarch in this kingdom willing to hear you out will see you out of the city, by force if necessary. Nia gulped in fear, and it was the first time she'd felt it radiate from His Majesty. She was quickly reminded he might seem happy and humble, but he could be equally as terrifying. She wanted to wipe her brow in relief when His Majesty let go of the captain's sword, and she begrudgingly sheathed it. It was equally relieving to watch His Majesty take his seat, while Lady Henry and not Jaldabaoth stood on either side of him, in front of the chairs to his left and right. We apologize for the dash. Think nothing of it, Vice Captain Gustav. The Grand Paladin's reaction was extreme, but insightful, as I said. Before I get to those insights, however, allow me to dispel the idea that Demiurge here is Jaldabaoth. Have you ever seen Jaldabaoth transform into his true form? Nia wondered what that had to do with it, but she was glad it was Vice Captain Gustav who spoke again. She isn't sure what would come out of Captain Remedios's mouth if she opened it again. We have, Your Majesty. Nia isn't surprised His Majesty's smile relaxed her after the Vice Captain explained what Jaldabaoth looked like in his true form. In all honesty, Nia had never seen it before, and she was even more glad, after the Vice Captain explained, that she'd never witnessed the sight. Very good. Now, each archdevil has a different purpose, however, they all look very similar. Take Demiurge and your Jaldabaoth. By your reaction, I know that Jaldabaoth is an archdevil as well, with how quickly you were to assume Demiurge was your enemy. However, each archdevil has a unique true form for their purpose. This was not something Nia, nor any of them, knew before that. From your description, you have described to me archdevils responsible for the domain of war. Like any race, many different positions are needed. War archdevils, such as Jaldabaoth, have all their powers, abilities, and forms designed to be generals and killing machines. Nia watched His Majesty then motion toward the archdevil he named Demiurge standing to his right. Demiurge here is also an archdevil, but he is a diplomat. Similar to what you are all doing here today, he is our ambassador to many kingdoms. Demiurge, please show them your true form. As you command, my king. Nia watched in fascination as the Jaldabaoth clone transformed into a frog with wings. Even Captain Remedios had her jaw drop at the sight. While the sight of a devil frog with bat wings was a bit unsettling, it certainly didn't invoke the terror Jaldabaoth's true form did. As you can see, ambassadors of the Holy Kingdom, Demiurge is a bit shorter and much less on fire than your Jaldabaoth. I hope this dispels your notions Jaldabaoth is attending this meeting or in league with the Psycho Kingdom. They all nodded their heads. Even Captain Remedios did it through gritted teeth, before it was, once again, Vice Captain Gustav spoke again. Thank you, Your Majesty, for putting us all at ease with the knowledge we are now afforded. It is good to know anything new about our foe. Nia watched His Majesty wave off the Vice Captain in the most regal manner she'd ever witnessed before speaking to them once more. Information is always the key to defeating any foe, Vice Captain, and I could tell you many things about archdevils that none of you would know. However, while I know you would welcome such information, this is not the reason you have come to our capital, is it, ambassadors of the Roble Holy Kingdom? We came to seek the aid of Queen Dash, Remedios started to answer, but Vice Captain Gustav saw where it was headed and cut her off. We have come seeking your aid in the war against Jaldabaoth, Your Majesty. When Ainz opened his mouth again, none of them expected what he said. I'm willing to offer aid to the Roble Holy Kingdom. All of them, Remedios included, were stunned and happy at Ainz' answer until he finished speaking. If we are able to agree to an alliance between our kingdoms, you do have the authority to negotiate such an alliance, yes? Ainz had already known the answer to the question, obviously. However, watching their faces fall, Remedios's specifically, was still rather satisfying. Well, except for one face. Is there no other way for you to offer us your aid, Your Majesty? Ainz didn't actually smile that Vice Captain Gustav was answering since Captain Remedios was in the process of grinding her teeth and glaring at him. He was having more fun with this than he thought he would. He wasn't sure his demiurge trick would be the main highlight of this meeting anymore. Not really, Vice Captain, no. Any aid I may offer can only be done with my military personnel. Without a formal alliance, I will not risk the safety of my army, and anyone who may aid you has either already joined the military or signed a contract stating they will never participate in any endeavor that isn't adventuring. All of them deflated at that until... Well, I suppose the Forsaken would be the exception to that. Your Majesty? The Forsaken have fought a foe similar to your Jaldabeth. Ainz didn't plan on stopping there, but Remedios interrupted him. Ainz didn't actually mind this, because he learned something he was sure Shaltir will enjoy. The Blood Queen. Remedios looked like she realized she interrupted, but she didn't apologize. She kept going when Ainz didn't say anything. We were told similar stories of their fight, but heard they were one of your adventurer teams. It wasn't just Demiurge who looked upset at her lack of title. Henry's face twisted into something other than a beaming smile for the first time as well. However, Ainz waved them off, realizing what they were going to say. You have heard correctly, Captain Remedios. However, we learned information that led them in pursuit of their foe, and they left before we reorganized the adventurer guilds. Therefore, while they are still an adventurer team from Irantal, they do not adhere to the same rules at this time. Could we dash? Ainz felt it only proper. He cut off the Grand Paladin. I have no problem if they want to help you. He was getting a little too much satisfaction watching Remedios' smile and paused a bit too long so it would grow even wider before. Of course, you'll have to wait 5 years for them to return. Last we heard, they were just about to continue south into the wastelands and anticipated their quest taking 5 years, possibly longer. Ainz won't lie, seeing the despair in Remedios' eyes was quite satisfying. Taylar hadn't liked Kelka at first, but came to see the situation she had to deal with and learned to respect her, even if she had the woman killed, for now. However, Ainz is positive he'll not only be there, but very much enjoy the day Grand Paladin Remedios Custodio met her end. The woman was insufferable, but toying with her emotions was fun. Is there nothing else we can do, Your Majesty? Ainz did wonder what finally made the woman address him with his title, but he still wasn't done toying with her. It was quite fun after all. Perhaps Demiurge. Ainz suppressed the urge to smile when he heard Remedios grind her teeth at him, turning to Demiurge. Is there anything we can do to speed up the return of the Forsaken? If we use some of the resources that are currently protecting our borders, I believe we may be able to hasten their return by possibly 2 years, my king. Will it affect our safety, Demiurge? It will leave us more vulnerable, Your Majesty. However, we shall do our best if it is Your Majesty's will. I have faith you shall not fail me in this, Demiurge. Go ahead and do it. As you command, my king. Well, there you go. We already got it down to 3 years, Captain. I'm sure your army can hold out for that long, yes? Instead of drawing out the satisfactory look of despair in her eyes, though, Ainz was surprised to see the squire of the group step forward, take a knee, and bow her head. I apologize, but may I please make a request, Your Majesty? How dare a mere squire beg a favor of a king? Nia stayed there with her head bowed and tried to ignore her captain. She hoped if the woman was going to kill her, she'd wait a moment. Luckily for her. Don't worry about it, Captain. You are Nia Baraja. The woman who attended the ceremony with Priestess Adria, yes. Yes, I am Squire Nia Baraja of the Paladin Order of the Holy Kingdom, Your Majesty. What request do you have for me, Nia Baraja? Please allow for me to request the dispatch of the Forsaken to the Holy Kingdom as quickly as you possibly can, Your Majesty. Ainz had been curious about the girl just seeing her in the temple. Now he was getting more intrigued by the girl by the second. He wondered if she had any unique skills or talents. How quickly do you wish for them to be dispatched, Ms. Baraja? Nia hadn't budged from the kneeling position yet. As fast as you can, Your Majesty. Even if their arrival is only hastened by 1 more day. Would it be possible to do it faster than 3 years, Demiurge? Ainz turned to him, but always kept an eye on Remedios when he made his archdevil the center of attention. It was hard not to smile at the woman's reaction, but Ainz reined it in. If we devoted all we could to their cause, we may be able to speed it up to 2 years, Your Majesty. However, we are responsible for the security of many other nations. It will leave weak points in our defenses that we will not be able to cover, my king. Ainz turned back to Nia but paused so that information could sink in before he asked her. Do you still wish to make your request, even though you now know it will leave my kingdom in a vulnerable position, Nia Baraja? Yes. If she wouldn't have answered as quickly as she did, and finally looked up at Ainz, Ainz would have had one less stipulation when he eventually helped them. However, before he could respond to her request. Your Majesty, I sincerely apologize for my squire's disrespect. We do not wish any harm on the Psycho Kingdom. My king, it would be ill-advised to leave ourselves so open to attack and infiltration. Do you know what 2 things I find most interesting about humans? Ainz asked it rhetorically, so he didn't give anyone time to answer. Their curiosity is very admirable. I find it makes them more adventurous than most, and very inventive, but there is something I admire even more. Ainz ignored both Captain Remedios and Demiurge's words and stood from his throne. Nia Baraja just got more interesting to him as he approached the girl because she didn't look away. Ainz barely noticed her turning red. It was a normal thing to deal with by now, as he stood in front of her and then helped her to her feet. I admire the bravery of humans more than anything. You know I'd be well within my rights to take your head, correct, Nia? She gulped but nodded. You very much remind me of me, Nia Baraja. I too would give my life if it meant saving my people sooner, even if it was only one day. Nia couldn't see it, but she wasn't the only one in her party that agreed with his words. However, Ainz turned his back on her and walked back to his throne but didn't sit. Nia very much missed His Majesty addressing her directly. Do not worry about any perceived insult done by your squire, Captain Remedios. I admire her bravery. Demiurge, see to it the Forsaken are back in Carne in 2 years. As you command, my king. Nia couldn't help but open her mouth in gratitude. Thank you so much, Your Majesty. Do not thank me, Nia. It was your bravery that saw to it. You have a good soldier in that squire, Captain. It takes a special kind of bravery to make the request she did. I am certain she is overjoyed by your words, Your Majesty. Well, I am glad we could find some way to help the Holy Kingdom in their time of need. Enjoy the rest of your stay in Carne, Captain, fellow paladins. Announcing the departure of His Majesty, exalted King Ainzul Gown. Ainz didn't wait for Henry to finish before he started making his way toward the door. He disappeared the moment the door shut with Demiurge, while the rest were being shown out by Henry. Nia watched every step His Majesty took as he left before she was ushered out of the building by the smiling Lady Henry. Nia was smiling as well until they got back to their rooms. When they got there, Nia's smile instantly dropped as Captain Remedios started laying into her. She apologized and took the blame for it, but it didn't help. Even when Nia told Captain Remedios she'd take full responsibility for it, the woman didn't stop berating her. Nia kind of hoped she'd tell everyone who wasn't in their party what happened. That way, they'd know at least someone tried to do something to help them. Nia was saved by Vice Captain Gustav pointing out she'd shaved an entire year off their waiting time, and then she finally got some orders she was more than happy to follow. The Vice Captain told her to take a walk to get away from the captain. Nia couldn't get outside fast enough. She looked in her small pouch of coins and knew she didn't have much. However, judging from what she got in Irantal, she thinks she is going to get a better meal somewhere than she thinks for far less than she imagines. The first thing she did wasn't go get a meal, though. She hadn't had much time to look at what she wanted to, up close earlier. She made her way to the side door of the temple, the one directly across from the entrance to the back of City Hall, and marveled at it. She thought it'd be a better idea to look at this one since the main entrance was heavily traveled. She has no idea why she ran her hand over the door, but it was the strangest thing to feel. The door looked to be made of metal and mostly felt like it, but it also felt soft. It was like when she touched the angels, she could feel their feathers, but when she touched the demons and devils, the metal got rougher, like their scales might. It was one of the most mesmerizing things she'd ever experienced, and she felt like she was tracing the battle with her fingers as she moved from right to left across the door. She was so caught up in looking at the door, she noticed when she could suddenly see a hallway where the door used to be. Nia? Nia looked down to see herself face to face with Adria. The woman was obviously coming out of the door, but she was very close to Nia. Adria? Nia felt stupid for the way she responded. It was obviously Adria, but she didn't know what to say. She was thankful the woman asked a question she could answer. What are you doing, Nia? I was just admiring the craftsmanship. Is that where you live? Nia remembered Adria telling her she lived in the temple. It would make sense she had a different entrance than the main one. This is my humble abode, yes. Adria giggled when Nia rolled her eyes at her statement. There was absolutely nothing humble about her abode. I was just about to go get something to eat. Would you like to join me? Nia's answer was both embarrassing and informative, and she didn't even open her mouth. Her stomach rumbled, and she nearly passed out from embarrassment. However, not because of her response. As embarrassing as that was, Adria smiled, got right up against Nia's side, took her arm, and started leading her down the street. You'll love the food stall crawl. You seem very curious, Nia. What's the food stall crawl? Nia thought it was an obvious question, but the way Adria lit up with a smile made it more than worth asking something so obvious. You can do it any time, but it is really special during the Founders Festival. You go from stall to stall trying as many different foods as you can, but there is so much more variety during the Founders Festival. Oh, look. I think that's a lizard man with something interesting. Try it with me. Nia was slightly mortified when Adria started dragging her toward a lizard man with a chef hat on. She had no idea what kind of weird meat he'd have for her to try. She felt like apologizing when she saw what he had. Fish. Not just any fish. The best-tasting fish Nia had ever eaten. It was over a bed of rice with diced vegetables in it, and Nia thought she'd died and gone to heaven. She was even more eager to try the next one, even when the man with the apron on was a minotaur. While the minotaur did have meat, it was normal cow, and it was delicious. Nia had seen beef cooked in many different ways before, but she never saw it buried in the ground to be cooked. It was also the most delicious thing she'd eaten. Nia had a feeling that thought wouldn't end as long as she had room in her stomach, and it turned out to be true. She even ate some weird, ill-looking creature at one of the stalls and enjoyed it. She isn't sure she'd ever order it again with all the other options, but she wasn't sorry she tried it. She'd done that for what felt like hours, and she was being led by the arm to the back of the City Hall building so she could go see if she had new orders. Adria was still clinging to her arm, which she'd done nearly all day, and Nia was starting to wonder why she was doing it. Adria was laughing at something Nia just said, but she couldn't remember if it was even funny. The sound of her laughter was musical, but it was interrupted when she heard some small burst, then a swirling sound. Her eyes widened when she saw Exalted King Ainz' old gown step out of the purple and black portal. She and Adria both took a knee immediately. Your Majesty. Both of you, please rise. I did not mean to interrupt your date. I was just hoping to speak with your party again, Nia. Nia went to stand, but nearly jumped out of her boots when His Majesty confused their outing as a date. Why, Your Majesty? We're not on a date. Nia was certain they weren't on a date. However, when she looked to Adria for confirmation, she swears she saw the woman's ears droop a little. When she went to open her mouth, though, it was His Majesty who spoke first. I'm not judging you, Ms. Baraja. People are free to love who they wish in our kingdom. Still, allow me to make it up to you by having sous chef cook breakfast for you and Adria tomorrow morning. Truly? By sous chef? Adria had a look of wonder on her face. Nia knew this somehow as an honor, but her smile fell completely when she turned to look at Nia. If it is all right with Nia, Your Majesty. Nia understood exactly what Adria was doing. They really had been on a date, and she was giving Nia the choice if she wanted it to be a date as well. All Nia had to do was tell His Majesty she had duties to attend to, which wasn't false, and make other excuses if he tried offering other solutions, and the idea this was a date would be squashed immediately. However, if Nia accepted His Majesty's offer, she was telling Adria she wanted it to be a date as well. Nia had never had to make a life-altering decision so quickly before. She stared up at Adria for a moment and immediately thought she had beautiful eyes. When she saw her smile a little, even though she was fighting it, Nia knew how she'd answer. "Thank you, Your Majesty." It wasn't lost on Nia that Adria held her breath for a moment. "I'd love to share a special breakfast with Adria." Nia was still a bit embarrassed to admit that out loud and turned red. However, nothing turned her red like the moment she felt Adria's lips press against her cheek as she looked toward His Majesty. She thought she'd faint with how red she got, but it wasn't His Majesty that spoke next. "See you tomorrow morning, Nia." Adria's melodic voice passed through Nia's ear, and she turned in time to see her flash Nia a bright smile before she turned and skipped, yes, skipped, back toward the temple. It was only when Adria was opening the door to her room and His Majesty chuckled that Nia realized how long she'd been staring at the retreating figure of Adria. "I'm so sorry, Your Majesty." Nia immediately turned and bowed deeply toward Ainz, but Ainz brushed it off in a way that made Nia turn even redder. "Think nothing of it, Nia. I too have trouble looking away when those I love walk away from me." Ainz must have noticed her turning redder. I apologize. I suppose it is too soon to mention such a thing considering you just met each other. Shall we head to see the rest of your retinue, Ms. Nia?" Nia couldn't have been happier His Majesty wanted to move on, even if he dropped the subject. Nia knew she was still beet red when they entered the circular stone room inside the building. She doesn't even think it went away much when she knocked on the conference room door, where she knew they were meeting right now. "Who is it?" Squire Baraja and Nia didn't even get to finish before the captain's tone changed dramatically. "Where the hell have you been, Squire Baraja? Get in here." She was momentarily mortified, but not because Captain Remedios was screaming like a maniac with His Majesty here. Nope, she was mortified that His Majesty grabbed the door handle and then winked at her before he opened it. Nia froze for a moment, but then stepped into the room when Ainz motioned her forward with his hand and a smile. She went to open her mouth again, but... "Answer me, Squire. Where have you been? I can come back later if this is a bad time." Captain Remedios looked about to explode on her until His Majesty spoke. Everyone in the room froze as he walked into the room. All of them bowed their heads immediately, but Remedios picked her head up quickly. "It is fine. How may we help you, Your Majesty?" "I was hoping to discuss a few things with all of you." Ainz was a bit surprised the woman motioned for the chair at the head of the table, opposite her, and waited until he sat down to sit herself. "What would you like to discuss, Your Majesty?" Ainz was a bit weirded out Captain Remedios was being so respectful all of a sudden, but he took advantage to move the conversation forward. "I'd like to discuss how I can help you, Captain." "But I thought..." Nia knew this would never happen, but she hoped one day Captain Remedios could learn to read the situation better. She just trailed off like some dumbfounded imbecile, instead of focusing on the fact someone was finally offering them assistance. "Well, your thoughts are correct, Captain. The Psycho Kingdom cannot give you any assistance. I cannot risk my people without something for them, and that is not something you can offer me. However, that does not mean I do not wish to help out the Holy Kingdom. If you are willing to acquiesce to a few conditions, I can lend you aid even more powerful than the Forsaken." "More powerful than the Forsaken? May we know the conditions which will require our agreement, Your Majesty? Also, we apologize if we cannot give you an answer immediately, depending on the conditions, Your Majesty." While Captain Remedios was taken aback and practically yelled at him, it was Vice Captain Gustav who asked a real question, one Ainz was quick to address. Ainz was grateful one of the paladins seemed to understand their situation and dilemma. "Of course, Vice Captain. I can imagine that. Even though you call yourselves the Holy Liberation Army, you are little more than a resistance movement. That is probably putting a very nice spin on it, as I imagine you are little more than guerrillas hiding in caves, yes?" Nia was as silent as everyone around her as they stared in disbelief at exalted King Ainz' gown. He told them their situation perfectly, and going so far as to point out they were based out of a cave, which they were, blew all their minds completely. However, exalted King Ain's old gown wasn't done telling them exactly how easily he could read their situation as he continued. You have come here, seeking the aid of the Psycho Kingdom, even though the Southern Holy Kingdom is completely untouched by your war. If you had the authority to offer trade deals or concessions, you would have come here with the support of the South already secured. Therefore, when the next Holy King takes his place, all of you, who failed to protect the Holy Queen, will, more than likely, not have the authority to follow through on any promises you made to the Psycho Kingdom. Nia's jaw continued to drop, but His Majesty still wasn't done yet. Also, you cannot use any items, such as your sword, to entice cooperation from another nation. If you did, say, trade me your sword for aid, it could end in several outcomes, most of which are very bad for you and or your kingdom. Either you'd be shunned for giving your enemy national treasures, or you'd say I stole them, and then you'd be at war with the Psycho Kingdom. Therefore, all you can do is what you did during our audience, inform me of your plight and pray I'd aid you. Ainz couldn't help but chuckle as he looked around. Well, I'm guessing from the looks on all your faces I nailed that right on the head, yes? Why yes, your majesty. But how did you know all of that? Nia still couldn't speak, seeing His Majesty's intelligence at work, and she knew she wasn't the only one rattled. It was the first time Nia had seen Vice Captain Gustav falter when dealing with His Majesty. I'm sure anyone with a little military knowledge would have deduced the same thing, no? Nia wanted to scream he was wrong at the top of her lungs. That wasn't a conclusion just anyone with military knowledge would come up with. Maybe a vague reference, but not something so accurate and detailed. Of course, Your Majesty. Nia saw Vice Captain Gustav agree with His Majesty, but she could tell he was in just as much disbelief as she was. Yes, just as I thought. With all of that being said, I believe, if you agree, we may benefit from working together as long as a few conditions are met. First, the aid I shall lend you will be for the sole purpose of defeating Jaldabaoth. I cannot justify fighting in battles against the demi-human army without an alliance. However, I believe Jaldabaoth needs to be dealt with before he becomes a problem for the Psycho Kingdom as well. Nia was doing all she could to hold back the smile that wanted to come out as His Majesty continued to speak. However, to lend my aid to your kingdom, I will still need to justify it to my people with benefits they may see. As such, the first condition would be that any magic items we come across that are not national treasures of the Holy Kingdom would be turned over to the Psycho Kingdom as payment for my aid. Nia thought that was, honestly, something anyone would agree to immediately, but His Majesty wasn't done yet. Second, High Priestess Atrin Kelsey's will be allowed to accompany us and speak to any innocent demi-humans we encounter. She will also be given leave to preach as she likes while we are in the Roble Holy Kingdom, and any innocent beings we encounter whom she converts, or agrees to join the Psycho Kingdom, shall be given the freedom to do as such. Nia could tell Captain Remedios didn't like that condition. The woman was grinding her teeth to give it away, but Nia didn't see the downside. If the High Priestess converted demi-humans and got them to join the Psycho Kingdom, they'd be far away from their borders and no longer pose a threat. It would be even better, in Nia's opinion, if the Psycho Kingdom simply took over the Ablion Hills. Then, the Holy Kingdom wouldn't have anything to worry about and instead have a very reliable ally if they could pull off a treaty of some sort. And lastly, any slave encountered on our journey shall be given their freedom. The Psycho Kingdom shall pay a fair price for their release, if they are still in chains, but no matter their race, they will be given the option to choose their future. The lone exception will be criminals who are under a sentence of slavery, if their crimes warrant such a punishment. Nia was still dumbfounded, but now for a completely different reason. She couldn't believe that was all His Majesty was asking for. Any other monarch would try to fleece the Holy Kingdom for all it had to aid against such a foe. Nia was wondering why His Majesty's conditions weren't agreed to immediately. However, she remembered who her captain was. Nia almost expected what came out of Captain Remedios's mouth next. You want us to allow a foreign, elf, priestess to preach a religion that goes against the four in the Holy Kingdom and allow people who don't dash. Your Majesty. Nia would be forever grateful the vice captain cut off Captain Remedios before she could continue her rant. She'd already caused enough damage with her words, and how she sneered at the word priestess when speaking on High Priestess Ashrin. May we please be allowed to discuss your requests for a few moments? Nia didn't understand what there was to discuss, but she was still happy the vice captain stepped in. She knew if Captain Remedios would have continued, they probably would have been thrown out of the city in the best outcome. Discuss all you like, but try not to take too much time. I am a busy man. However, His Majesty continued to sit and stare at them until, "Oh, I apologize, but I'm not moving. You may either discuss it in front of me, step out into the hallway, or use another room." It was only the captain and vice captain who headed toward the door, and Nia was grateful she didn't have to follow them. She wasn't surprised they returned in moments. They shouldn't have even stepped out in the hallway, in her opinion. Although, it was worth it seeing the looking on her captain's face as she ground out. "We shall abide by your Majesty's conditions. May we know what aid you shall be lending us?" Nia was eager to find out exactly what His Majesty meant as well. She was just as confused as everyone else though when His Majesty looked confused by the captain's question, until he opened his mouth. "I already told you, it is myself." Complete and utter silence filled the room as they all processed what His Majesty just said. Nia had to blink repeatedly a few times to restart her brain, so it could process exactly what His Majesty just admitted to. She is surprised it was the captain who came to her senses first. "Your Majesty is stronger than the Forsaken?" Nia wanted to scream that His Majesty obviously was, especially since she knew the captain saw him turn High Priestess Ashrin into a divine elf. What left her speechless was the glint in her captain's eye as she said those words. However, one of them wasn't speechless as the rest of them were. "Please wait a moment, Captain." The vice captain stopped Remedios from continuing and turned to His Majesty. "Is it truly all right for you to leave your kingdom? We do not know how long this mission shall take, Your Majesty. There will be moments I shall need to take my leave for a time, for instance, when Albedo gives birth again, but unlike the rest of you, I am able to teleport. Therefore, as long as I know where you're currently based, I may come and go as needed. But Your Majesty, surely having the king of another kingdom come in person is dash." Nia wanted to shout and yell that they needed to stop conjuring up ways to scare off the only aid that had been offered to their kingdom, but it was His Majesty that cut off the vice captain. "Did you not listen when I was speaking? I said I had to justify my aid to your kingdom. That any magic items we came across would be the property of my kingdom. That High Priestess Ashrin would be accompanying us. That slaves on our journey would be given the option of freedom. And to answer the captain's question, I'm stronger than all of the Forsaken combined. Then, Your Majesty is most welcome to join us, Gustav. I don't see the problem." "Of course, there's a problem with that, Captain. Your Majesty, I'm not sure I can take such a jest when we are in such dire need of aid." "This is no joke, Vice Captain. I am the only one capable of defeating Jaldabaoth who will offer you aid. Without an alliance, I cannot bring my army, so the only way to defeat Jaldabaoth, without the aid of an army, will be for me to defeat him myself." "What about exalted Queen Taylar?" "But what if Your Majesty sustains life-threatening injuries? Our relationship with the Psycho Kingdom might turn out worse than the Jaldabaoth invasion if that were to happen." While it was Remedios who asked the first question, it appeared the vice captain forgot she existed and kept going, not only over the top of the captain, but long after she finished as well. "Any injuries I sustain will not fall upon the shoulders of the Holy Kingdom. I have already made sure of that. As far as Taylar aiding you, she is against me helping you at all. You are lucky I convinced her of the threat Jaldabaoth may pose to our kingdom if he wipes you out, or you would have left Karne with no aid. I don't think it is in my love's heart to truly hate someone, but she really dislikes your country and doesn't care in the least what happens to you." Ainz had to fight back the smirk when he saw Remedios deflate completely. It was really hard to do when she whispered out, "WI." Very simple. You are allies of the slain theocracy and not metaphorical allies, but allies in writing with a signed treaty. After all the attempts on my life and all their spying, my love truly despises the slain theocracy and any whom they call an ally. And don't bother pointing out they didn't come to your aid, as true allies would. I already tried to convince her of that, and if I couldn't do it, there is no way any of you would persuade her. Can we speak with Her Majesty? Ainz did admire the woman's determination, if nothing else. He was tempted to allow her to speak with Taylar, knowing it would probably end in the woman's death. Taylar had all but demanded to come to take Remedios' head when Ainz returned to them after the audience and saw how she treated Ainz. I'm afraid that is not possible. Not only does she not wish to speak with you, but she also isn't incarnate anymore. Just like Albedo, she enjoys spending time with our children more than ruling. You may either agree to my conditions and accept my aid, or return to the Holy Kingdom empty-handed. Your Majesty is truly willing to aid us? But Captain, we can't dash. Gustav, be quiet, I am still speaking to His Majesty. For the first time, Nia was grateful it was the captain stopping the vice-captain from speaking, not the other way around. If your Majesty wishes to aid us, we shall be in your care. Nia couldn't remember the last time she saw her captain smile, but she was doing it now. However, Nia saw something a little off in the way she smiled at His Majesty. She would have continued to analyze what it was, but His Majesty drew all her attention again. Good. I'm glad we could settle that. We shall leave in 3 days, so I may get my affairs in order. Also, I have one last condition I was hoping you would agree to. Nia felt they should accept any request His Majesty made, but she doubted that feeling when his eyes turned to her, and he made his final request.
That's it for today. Remember to show your support to the creator of this story if you enjoyed it. If you would like more parts of the story to be uploaded, leave a comment and subscribe to get notified when the story continues. Bye-bye for now, and I hope that you all have a wonderful rest of your day.